All right, I guess I gotta start. Well, rewatch the Vaush versus Flowers debate to refresh my memory on how bad she is. I guess I don't know. Maybe I was wrong looking at it. I don't know. Maybe a second viewing will help, but my brain a tiny bit.
Colonizers, you yourself acknowledged it's possible for a white person to live ethically in South Africa. So maybe we go below the surface level and we talk about the underlying issue, like colonization and the systemic problems that lead to that. Hey, howdy.
Hi.
How are we doing today?
Doing all right. I wasn't planning on spending my day off talking with you, but glad it's happening. Um, my friend VP, who I mentioned in my last video, had this great idea for me to make brownies, and I cut them up into little pieces. And the idea is that if there's anything that you want brownie points for, I can just take this and put this in the jar. And I figured that maybe at the end we could count all the brownie points together.
Nice. No,
I
I
remember
like
you
that.
saying that.
I'm on a diet
Yeah,
though,
I
so I
remember you
can't
saying on the last.
can't eat them.
As cute as the
No,
brownie
it's a
thing is, I
shame
can't
because
believe
you're
I
nearly
forgot about
dying.
that.
So
Oh well.
I just remember like the last video that you said that you're helping me out by platforming a content creator a 30th year size. So maybe we could start off with that for a brownie point if you wanted.
Oh well, yeah, I want as many brownie points as I can get. And yeah, isn't that how it
Awesome.
always works, right? It's actually something that I've been struggling with a lot recently with my channel, because people will I don't mean you with this. I legitimately don't mean you, but like usually like far right types. They antagonize me because they want the attention. And the attention they get it whether or not they come off looking good in interaction with them. So
Yeah.
it's you got to be careful with the clout game. It's rough out here. It's like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Cloud game is weak.
So
Hey, I want to talk
what did
politics.
you ask me
Talk
on?
shop.
Yeah. Want to talk? Sure. Let's get to down why you asked me on here.
Yeah. Well, I guess I took issue with your video, the first one, and I guess the second one was just sort of a follow through on the issues that I had with the first one. Um, there is a mistake that I made, which I'd like to address up front, which is at a couple of times when I responded to your first video, I stated outright that if you would watch the entirety of the debate that I had with Dia Angel, I think that was their name, then you would find that
DIA Angel.
DIA Angel, that I would have changed my mind on the black separatism, black nationalism semantic distinction there. And that's actually not true. I changed my mind. I must have changed it in the following days afterwards. But I was wrong in the context of that specific debate. My position hadn't changed from beginning to end. Of course, since then, I think that I've been pretty responsible with my rhetoric, which is why I took issue with your assertion that I spread misinformation on this.
Yeah, I understand you saying that, and I'm a little bit confused because my video actually talks about that. My video talks about how originally in the original debate, you talk about how you're against black nationalism. Eventually, you realize like, oh, I'm talking about black separatism. Correct that.
Separatism.
And then in my original video, actually, I talk about how your definition of black separatism and comparing it to white nationalism is still an issue because the context of what those things are very different. White nationalists who are separatists want to live in a different state because they think that black people are inferior. And people who are black separatists, there's obviously people who are very problematic in that group that I'm not going to sit here and defend. But there are a group of people who are separatists because they just want to be away from their oppressors. And so
Define
painting them in a
oppressors.
bad light is also an issue. Painting them as just white nationalists, basically, like making that false equivalency is an issue because when people talk about that, when people talk about how they need to get away from their oppressors, people talk about how they have
Who
to
are
have
the
their own
oppressors?
spaces. They're just painted as basically white nationalists and how that's a problem. It's making that space
I
more
can't believe this
hostile
is
for
just a
people with
simple
those views.
question. I think even
Yeah,
Vaush
well,
like
I
didn't even
I
ask
guess
her.
I just really do think they're pretty
Like,
simple.
who are the
When you
oppressors?
take a
What
look
does
at
the
a lot of
oppressor
black
mean?
separatist communities, there are a lot of underlying reactionary tendencies like homophobia, anti-Semitism. A lot of them do seem to believe in the same Jewish question, just from the opposite perspective. Nazis think that Jewish people want to destroy white people by bringing in, black and brown people. And black separatists often think that Jewish people want to destroy black people by promoting white industry at the expense of black culture. And it seems like the fundamental bones are pretty similar, and then when you get into the logistics of creating an ethno-state, there's not really any way to do that without genocide, you know? Like, take South Africa, right? I mean, it's all well and good to talk about living free of your oppressors, but when you break apartheid in South Africa, there are millions of white people living in that country. Like, what do? Do you just, like, ship them all out? Do you build camps? I mean, it seems like this logic always leads down a really bad road.
There's a few things in there. So one of them is that the black separatists they're talking about who are homophobic, anti-Semitic, I agree. Fuck that. I'm not gonna like sit here and be like, that's a good thing. We need to like give that space to talk. I'm not talking about those kinds of people. Um, I'm talking about the people who just want to be away from their oppressors. And then in the issue of South Africa, for example, or I guess any colonized country in Africa, like the way that people take power from their oppressors, even if it's not full on separatism, is they take the power back that's taken away from them. And then that's how they kick out the people who colonize them. There's a number of ways that, that could look like without actually committing genocide.
Doesn't that, I mean, how do you kick out millions of people because of their race without it being a
You
genocide?
take out, so like when colonization happens, the people who colonize those places take over industry, making it so that way the people who have the most power are running those countries. So what you do to take away their power is you take the power back. You make those industries not run by the people who are colonize them. And then because they have a lack of power, those people tend to leave. That's just like one example off the top of my head.
Oh, sure, sure. If you mean like reappropriating businesses and fairly distributing them, and then people of their own volition leave, that's fine. But that's not what I tend to see from like black separatists, right? They aren't like, we should have a proportional amount of industry controlled by black people in X country and then let the cards fall where they may. There's usually an explicit intent to not live with the racial groups that are associated with their oppression, which is kind of what you use in your video too, right? Like, you don't say people in colonized countries should have the right to reappropriate industry and make it democratic. You say they should have a right to determine whether they want to live with their oppressor. You're giving the state the power to deport people or kill them when that's the language you
It's
use.
generalizing because who is the oppressor? That's
My
the
point
thing.
is that the people who colonize those people, if the people who are there and they live in their own country don't want to live with people who are colonized, they should have the right to determine if they want to live with those people or not. And I think that could look like a number of things. And my point is that it doesn't actually have to always look like genocide. And the way that you're painting it is just comparing it to white nationalism. And so my point is that you can critique these things. You don't have to agree with these things, but you can talk about that sentiment without calling it the same thing as white
But
nationalism.
I
And
talk
that's my point of the two videos.
But I've talked to white nationalists, and they kind of talk exactly like how you talk. Most of them aren't bold enough to say, yeah, I want to genocide or deport all the non white people. Usually it's like, yeah, we want to restrict immigration from X countries, and we want to pay people to leave, and we want to incentivize white power in our country. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it seems like the underlying logic here is the same, right? Whether the grievances are legitimate or not, and I want to make a clear distinction here. Black people in South Africa have been oppressed by white people. White people in America are not oppressed by Jews or whatever. So obviously, in terms of correctly identifying past modes of oppression, there's a huge difference. But the feelings of persecution are the same. Nazis do feel persecuted, and as a product of that, the language they use comes out really similar to this. We should have the right to determine a space for our people, a right to choose our homeland. So the language to me comes off really, really similar to white nationalist stuff, especially when we're dealing in like really ambiguous terms like they should have a right to live free of the oppressors. I mean, how can a person be an oppressor because of their race? Did all the
It's such
millions
a
of white people in
generalizing
South
statement.
Africa like individually oppress all the black people there? It just seems weird to be retaliatory in that way.
So it's not that every single person is necessarily an oppressor. The thing that people are talking about with racism comes down to the system that people are part of. For example,
It
I'm
doesn't matter
adopted
if that's what
and
you're
my
saying or if that's what
dad
you
is
believe,
white,
but your
and
words can
he's a
like
European
easily
immigrant, actually.
allude
And
to that.
he might not have been a part of the people who
It can imply
enslaved
such,
black people
which
or
is the
descendants of
problem.
those people, but he's still profiting off of a racist system. And there needs to be some sort of disempowerment of those people as far as power and racist structures in order for there to be equality. So that's the point that I'm getting at. The reason why I'm being vague is because if you look at different countries who have decolonized themselves, you have like all these different ways that those countries have gone about it. You have people who have been very violent, and you have people who have somehow done it peacefully.
Does that make it better? Oh, you eat chicken grease. You have given me terminal cancer,
Reading
Vaush.
a book called Ujamaa, or it's called Ujamaa, but it's by Julius Nyerere, who was one of the leaders of colonialism in Tanzania. Unfortunately, after he died, a lot of things were put in place, but he did it completely through voting, which is amazing. And we're also reading like Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. Frantz Fanon did a lot of work in Algeria, which and there was like a lot of violence that happened there. I think like dealing with colonialism is going to be messy, and there needs to be room to have nuance in these conversations. And I think just kind of reducing it to like, oh, this is white nationalism is very reductive, and it doesn't really give space for those people to talk about what to do.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on their ethnic group, you know? I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of
that ethnic group colonized a group of people.
Oh,
that's really generalizing, okay? Yeah, but not all of them participated in it, and most of the ones that are here now are simply just descendants of the ones that committed that sin.
I agree that the ethnic group did indeed participate in the colonization, but I don't believe in taking blanket retribution against people for their bloodline because they're associated with the bloodline.
Thank you. How are people on Flower's side with this? Lord Jesus.
About being away from the people who oppressed you. It's about taking your power back from the people who oppressed you.
This is unironically racist. Can I say this is racist? Because it feels racist. You're literally generalizing people for the sins of their ancestors.
You know what I'm saying? It's very different for each country and each context.
You can do that without deportation or creating an ethno-state.
You're literally essentially saying that white people are inherently colonizers.
That ethnic
and even the descendants of those colonizers have to deal with the sins of the colonization.
A very effective way of changing the socioeconomic reality.
This is like literally a revenge fantasy, bro. And it feels incredibly racist. It
seems like, if anything, it's an act of retribution. That people would go, oh, well, since we were the oppressed for centuries, now we have the right to enact moral vengeance against you and remove millions of you from the country or something. And that just seems to me, I mean, not only are you basically being the villain there, it just seems to me like this is a really impractical way of fixing any of these issues, you know? Like, I mean,
I think that's fair to say. Like, that you could say, like, wow, like...
Do you really think it's fair to say?
Millions of people is like not really useful or helpful.
No, it's not. So shut up about it.
Like when you look at people who are working on decolonizing, like that's not necessarily what's happening. People are just trying to like get the people who have power over them to leave. And I think in that context, that makes sense insofar as you're trying to break down a power structure. That's where I stand on it personally.
I'm okay with taking down these politicians.
I don't think any ethnic group has any more of a right to a country than any other ethnic group. I don't think any racial group here in America has the right to decide whether they want to live with any other racial group.
So, like, just to like be clear, because I actually don't know your views on this, like, you don't think that we should give the land back to indigenous people?
If that involved deporting the people who live here who aren't indigenous, then God, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think we could fix one genocide with another one. I think there are ways to address the problems with, like, Native American people here today involving, like, land redistribution or, like, forms of reparation and stuff, but if it involves like displacing like millions of Americans, that seems I don't know, that seems pretty bad.
I mean, I think it sounds pretty bad. I don't think indigenous people are trying to do that.
How do you know that?
I agree. Like, yeah.
These are the people who are colonized.
Do you know indigenous people?
Have their own autonomy.
I'm not saying that they will or won't. It's just like
colonized by people.
They're
and again,
indigenous people are people just like the rest of us. Some would probably think like that, others won't.
Well, wait.
You can't say for certain that they will or won't about this because it's a lot of nuance to this type of question.
Killing us, right?
I mean, I don't think they should be allowed to start killing people. What I'm saying is, like, they should have the right to decide if the colonization should continue, of the people who should
What do you
stay
mean
here.
colonization should continue? It's over. It's
Here,
done.
The whole of America? Do we deport a third of a billion people back to Europe or something? I mean, we caused like a worldwide catastrophe so that what? A few million people can re-inherit the land. I like the logistics of this seem really odd to me. Shouldn't we talk about ways that you can pragmatically address these issues and not like just give massive moral leeway?
That is a lot of zombies, and that's terrifying the fuck out of
Being
me.
oppressed means that you have any more of a right to be like a moral judge, jury, and executioner than any other member of any other group.
I think the point is that it's not actually like the US's land. We're on indigenous land, and they need to have their own autonomy. I highly doubt that if we gave the land back to indigenous people, that they would do the same thing that white people did to them.
How do you
And I
know
think
that?
That's also like a mistake around black people. Like black people having power doesn't mean that they're gonna just like start murdering white people.
Yeah.
White people just like want equality, or black people.
How do you know that?
Wait, but I don't
So
have
it's
a
like I think
problem
people should have.
with land back. I don't have a problem with black people having power. I'm specifically saying I take issue with your claim that oppressed people have the right to determine whether or not they want to live with their oppressor. I don't think the land back movement is about kicking Europeans out.
Like, there's so many ways that could look like besides committing mass genocide. You know, like you keep on talking about like, oh, that means that we're just gonna kill people or deport people. There's just so many ways that could look like in the U.S. that could look like.
You're saying you want to give them the power to choose not what to do or not.
What to do.
But
No.
I'm in favor of those things. I'm explicitly against the claim you
It's
made.
like if you're in favor of those things,
What
then
are
it's
those?
like
Yeah, they can do what they want, but can we
bothers
take
me is
genocide
that
off the
when people
table?
talk
That's
about
it.
this,
That's all
people
we
even
need.
start to talk about like just, you know, how left tube is divided by race, right? Like I watched that you have with No Name and say Andrew. This person's just saying like, hey, my tweets aren't for you. You're calling this person a segregationist. That's my point. My point is that people can't say their opinions without being called these extremes. People can't even talk about like, wow, what would it be
Welcome
like
to
to live in
Twitter.
a world
Quick
where we're
line.
not around the people who are oppressing us that time all the time. And then we talk about this, and then we start talking about separatism as this wild extreme. It's like there are separatism that I think is this wild extreme, but there's also
You're
separatism
doing
that
it back and forth. Just
I
to be
don't
told,
really
just to
think
be
it is, and we don't have room for this conversation.
So just to be clear, I don't think you have a right to live in a world without white people or in a country without white people. You
Yeah.
keep dancing back and forth between these 2 points. I don't think any ethnic or racial group has a right to exclude or expel other ethnic or racial groups for any
God,
reason,
those
no matter
zombies,
who's
bro.
the colonized or the colonizer. Now, if we're talking about other policy to redistribute power or address differences or
Oh my God.
stuff like that, then absolutely, I'm on board with that, and I spend time on my platform advocating for those things. But the problem that I had with those no-name tweets is that it was like, my cultural product isn't for white people. I think that's
Which two?
segregationist gatekeeping.
Oh God.
Not
Oh
obviously
God. Oh
not
God. Oh
like,
God.
you
Oh
know,
God. Oh God.
one
Oh
water
God. Oh
fountain for
God.
the other type stuff. We're not talking about state power
But
here.
you can understand that there's black people who want to have black spaces. Like you understand that.
Yeah, as long as they're not
Black
like
people
backed
have
by the
black
force of the state. Yeah.
Okay, well, No Name's just saying that this tweet is for white people, and you're calling that person a segregationist. That's like the kind of rhetoric I'm critiquing. And again, I'm not saying that you can't.
I don't think they see me.
That you can't like be on board with this stuff. What I'm saying is that
Is he carrying a
your content
bone?
that you're making is making such extremes where
Oh
people
my
talk
God.
about how they're frustrated with white people. People talk about how like, hey, we need spaces where it was with black people. This content isn't made for white people, so your opinion isn't as relevant here. When that's happening, you're calling these people segregationists, comparing
I should have
everyone
brought a bow.
in this box to white nationalism. And what I'm saying is that's not a fair critique. I think it's okay if you're not okay with separatism. But what I'm saying is that these critiques and making these false equivalencies to white nationalism is unfair.
Well, I didn't
Does
call.
that make sense? Does that clear things up?
Well, I didn't call No Name a white nationalist. I don't remember the
You
exact
said,
tweet thread.
you said that she was a segregationist.
Well, and yeah, there were elements of that stuff that were pretty segregationist, I think. So, like, I don't have much respect for
The
the.
tweet that said.
Oh,
The tweet that said.
okay.
This isn't for white
Drip.
people. That was it. That was the tweet.
Well, I think
that
it
you
was
were talking
that was
about.
in response to some other stuff, right? Where people
Oh,
criticized
okay,
it,
the other zombies got drip.
said that it's not
Okay.
for white people. I need to look at the thread again. But
A lot of
if I
drip zombies right
remember
now.
The general gist of stuff. The thing that bothers me is that I think that the only real difference between doing that and somebody saying this content isn't for black people is really like broader societal power. I think it's really unproductive to suggest that racism can be fixed or addressed by reifying and reflecting a lot of the exclusionary tendencies that systemic racism brings about only through the lens of the oppressed, you know? And No Name has done some stuff that I found pretty yikesy. I have to go back and look through the Twitter thread. When I was having the conversation with the person who was defending those tweets, it also feels to me sometimes like we're not really talking about justice. We're just talking about some black people don't really like being around white people, which I guess is you're right, but I don't think that's like a morally defensible political movement, you know?
Give me that, whatever you have.
But
Like, you don't understand why there are black people who don't want to be around white people.
I understand why there are
Like-
white people who don't want to be around black people, but I don't give them much moral credence either. I get why they want it. I just don't think that
You
it's
can
necessarily a good
understand,
thing.
like, why people who have to deal with racist shit all the time are like, hey, I don't want to be around the people who keep on making racist shit.
Well, then you're racist for assuming that that group of people is just going to be racist inherently.
Well,
I'm sorry, I unironically think that's racist. I don't want to be around white people because a lot of them are racist.
Well, I think you can.
Yeah, I
say,
don't want to be
want
around black people because a lot of them are
space. What you've
criminals
just
and
done there
thugs.
is a centralized
It's the
racism.
same kind of
Something only
like
white
justification.
people express, and something black
There's
people don't
almost no
express.
difference
And I
there, to
can
be
tell
honest
you
with
from
you.
my experiences online, there are a lot of black people who are pretty goddamn racist in all directions, and there are a lot of white people who aren't. If you want an anti-racist space, go for it. Godspeed. Make more of them. But when you essentialize it as like a white-black thing, I think that can lead to a lot of really bad roads, you know?
I don't understand, like, why it's wrong if a black person's like, I'm talking to black people right now.
Well,
And I think a lot of white people aren't going to get it.
well, I mean,
I just don't understand, like, how that leads to bad things. And, like, that's just, like, a reality that black people are dealing with all the time. Where they try to talk with white people about racism. And then, oh, they're called a white nationalist. They're called a segregation. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, your content is actually the perfect example of why it's like, yeah, we need black spaces. And if you want black people to stop needing black spaces,
Don't judge me.
you got to stop comparing black people to white nationalists whenever you disagree with them.
well,
You know
I
what I'm
don't. Well,
saying?
I don't. Every time I disagree with them, I think that's a pretty bad characterization of my position.
Sorry,
think-
when so many times you disagree with them. My
So,
bad.
I found the tweet from. No
He
Name
does
that I
that
really
to
took
a
issue
lot
with.
of
Do you mind
people.
if I read it, just because we've talked
Not
about it, so I
just
think
black
the
people.
context is relevant.
Sure.
No Name said, "Why are white leftists more eager to unify with radicalized communities than organizing your own people first? Unity with black people is meaningless as long as the masses of white people are indoctrinated into white supremacy and liberalism. Please don't speak to me about police." The last sentence being in reference to the
That's
tweet
actually
she's
not the
quoting.
tweet that I'm talking about.
Oh, is there a different
It's
tweet?
not the tweet I'm talking about.
How many No
There's a
Name
different
tweets do I
tweet, but it's in the
dislike?
same. There's two. There's one in a video from earlier. I guess I can try to find it. But
Well, I'd say that tweet that I just read, though, is kind of an indicator of the behavior that I don't like. It's essentially saying, hey, white leftists, you know, you have a quota of white people you have to de-radicalize before you're allowed to interact with the black community, which seems like such pointless, unproductive, like, gatekeeping. Like, what is that? How does that improve anything with regards to racism besides, like, making white leftists feel more awkward and uncomfortable talking about race issues? You know?
sorry,
It's like
I'm
stay in
looking
your
for the
lane, you
quote.
know? I don't think it's okay to say stay in your lane to black people. I don't. Seems like kind of.
I think there is a lane that, like, white people are in. That tweet kind of confused me because hold on, let me just pull it up because
We're all in one lane, and it's the lane of life, you know? We're on the Autobahn. It's just one giant road. Well, I guess the Autobahn
Oh my God.
has lanes, too.
we're in the lane of life. It's like just kind of completely, like, ignores, like, the racial divides that actually exist. You know what I'm saying? It's like, wouldn't it be nice if we were all in the lane of life? But we're not. We have, like, all these issues that we have to deal with for us to actually be able to see each other as that.
Well, by the lane,
So-
I don't mean, like, liberal colorblindness. I mean that I think that people of any race have a right to talk on any issue. I think cis people
I
should be
agree.
able to speak confidently on trans issues,
I
white
agree.
people on black issues, black people on white issues, and so on. I think that
I think
It's
an
like-
outside perspective is kind of valuable in some way, as long as it's coming from a place of trying to improve things that are bad, that are, you know, discrimination towards these minority groups.
You can definitely,
My cis
like,
perspective
speak on behalf of other people, but then
is
the
valuable
huge issue is that people
to
need to really understand what they're talking
transgender
about.
issues.
You need to go to these
Whether they
communities
agree
and
with
go,
me or
"Hey,
not, I
what's up?
could be
What are
wrong
you
in some things, but I
doing?"
also
And
could
then
be
you can
right.
talk to
It's
them in
not.
context, trying to
It's
represent them
an
as
interesting
close
thing to
as
talk
possible.
about.
And before you talk
I
with them,
don't
you
know.
have to, like, go back and be like,
I don't
hey,
know.
did I understand this correctly? Did I get this right? That can take so much time to do, but I think people shouldn't be trying to represent anybody if they don't understand what they're talking about. That's kind of my issue. Like in the issue of like No Name's tweet, for example, like again in this video that I watched, like you said that this person was a segregationist.
Well, I need to see
like
the tweet to understand the context.
Okay, let me find it.
It's okay. I didn't mean to send you on a hunt for it or anything. I thought that I had found that. I didn't realize there were 2 tweets I took issue with. Out of curiosity, which Democratic primary candidate did you support back during the primaries?
Bernie Sanders.
I voted for Biden.
Interesting.
Okay, I voted for Biden.
Didn't want to, but you know.
Sorry.
What about the
primaries?
The primaries? Who did you support?
Oh, primary. Yeah, he was talking about the primaries.
I really was hoping that Bernie would win, and then I also heard about some other candidates that I really liked, like Gloria LaRiva, but I didn't think that there's going to be enough people who voted for her, even though I liked her policies more than Bernie. So I still stuck with Bernie.
Blaney.
Right. So this is the issue, right? Because the black community didn't side with Bernie. They sided with Biden. So would my support for Bernie back during the primaries have been an indication that I was failing to listen to the needs of the black community? Or do you think that I have like a right to,
I hear it.
for my own reasons and my own opinions?
Oh, that's a
disagree with
creeper.
That community,
Jesus.
Support an agenda of racial reform that's with a candidate they don't necessarily
Trying to increase my
you could
performance.
go the same direction with like
Please.
abolishing the police. A lot of the black community didn't support abolish the police. It was mostly people like us, largely online, young, leftist radicals who supported that. So is this an issue of us making a mistake by ignoring them? Or do you think it's okay to advocate for racial issues without necessarily deferring to the group opinion of black people?
I think the issue is that you need to like listen to what people are saying. Like, for example, like when and again, I define like listening as not just doing whatever people say, but seeking understanding. So like when I talk about how I wanted to vote for Bernie and I ended up voting for Biden because it was lesser two evils, there are other people out there who are like, well, if I voted for Bernie, I don't think that would make a difference. And when I first hear that, I'm like, that's really wild because like Bernie has sparked this socialist movement in America. Even though he's not a true socialist, he got a lot of people interested in it. Who's a very inspiring person. And then when I hear people talk about like why they don't like Bernie, it's usually a lot of black people who grew up really poor, and it's black people who are
so pathetic.
Really competitors, even though he wasn't one part of that. But that people lost so much hope in this person, and people are like, listen, at the end of the day, whoever we vote in, the structure of that we're voting into.
I'm sitting there calling this creeper pathetic, bro.
So we need to figure out how to fight this system just by trying to vote less of the two evils.
Come on, bro.
There's space to have that conversation, and still maybe vote for Biden, for example, because he's lesser of two evils.
No.
We don't have to just have like one or the other. There needs to be space for that conversation.
I don't need this, bro.
Because when I listen to black people, especially black people who grew up poor, who are like, I don't like Bernie, even though my initial reaction is like, wow, I love Bernie, what's wrong? Like when I hear why they don't like Bernie, I'm like, wow, you really have been fucked over by this person, and that makes sense. So maybe we should talk more about how to fight this system instead of just voting for the lesser of two evils. And that conversation.
God, I hate baby zombies so much.
People who are saying vote for the lesser of two evils are like, shut the fuck up, and that's an issue.
No, I agree it's important to be able to have that conversation, but what you're talking about right now is what you do when you disagree with the black community. And I guess that's kind of my question, right? Because what happens
if I disagree
with the community you're telling me to defer to? I see this a lot
Jesus.
I disagree with, that if I say something...
Alright, this is getting scary.
Well, you should listen to black people, you should listen to trans people, but you said earlier, you think it's okay for white people to speak on behalf of black people. I am not speaking on behalf of anyone with any of my positions.
Just giving his perspective.
Trans rights.
That's it.
I am not speaking on behalf of trans people. Only my own opinions. They could all disagree with me, and I'd still say what I say. I don't care if every one of them disagrees with me. I believe what I believe is right, not because they tell me to, but because I've argued it and I've thought about these positions.
Hey, if you think it's what's best for that community, then you think it's what's best for that community.
So
dude, why are you standing there?
It's odd to me. It's almost like we prioritize a sort of in-group deference to the opinions of minorities over the ability to actually formulate and defend an argument. And then, like, you get people who exploit that on the right. Blair White, who when I debated her said she
God.
was odd that a cis man would be critiquing her for transphobia, or Candace Owens, who calls everything that breathes in her racist. There are people
Even though Candace Owens is trash and Blair White is also trash, the Uncle Tom of the trans community, bro.
Yeah,
There's so
I
many
think
goddamn
the thing
creepers.
is that you need to make sure that like the people that you're representing, like let's say like there's like disagreements or something. They're all obviously like no one's a monolith. There's gonna be people who have all these different views. At first, I think it's still important to try to understand like why are there all these people with different views
What?
in these communities. And then secondly, if there's someone where like okay, I'm like really standing with you, I think you need to really understand like why they're saying what they're saying, and then run it by them before saying more than that. And then if people critique you, for example, try to actually really understand why they're critiquing you instead of just calling them like a white nationalist or something or a segregation.
What if I? What if? What if that's
like,
what I think?
really
What if?
different than what's
Yeah.
happening right now.
What
If that's
like,
true about them, then it's true. Wait, is this? Oh crap! Yes. What?
Like he
Dog.
literally said that St. Andrew wanted to start a race war.
There would
It's
be a
like,
skeleton
come
in here. Are you
on,
kidding me,
Come
man?
on, St. Andrew.
I need the
Like, just
I need the
don't
context to
say
know.
that shit then.
Well,
It was in the same video as the No Name thing, and I found the No Name tweet where he called her a segregationist. The tweet is, "Why do white people follow my every move?
Where?
This shit is not for you." And then you were like,
The
"Well,
mine
I'm
ship
not a segregationist
spawned
like this
inside,
person." I'm
bro.
just like,
How lucky?
I guess I
How
just think
unlucky.
that
do
stuff
that
is
for
really.
starters. Just don't do that.
I guess I just think
try
that
to
stuff is
understand.
really weird, especially as a big public figure. You know, to be a really huge public figure, and then
Dog.
for what seems to me like no reason at all. Like, why make it a race thing? Like, you can make it a racism
It is
thing.
a race
No,
thing.
no,
It's already a race thing.
it's a
What
race-
do you mean? Make it a race thing.
It's a racism
It is
thing.
one.
If there's racism, you can call out racism without like being like, oh, this isn't for this racial group, you know? Like, now I admit I engage in language here sometimes it's a bit irresponsible. I make plenty of jokes about
What is the difference between saying this isn't for this racial group
Oh,
or this
Jesus.
isn't for white people? What's the difference? I don't. Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, if you want to be super like nuanced about it, you can talk about how there are elements of the black experience that are carried through in her work, and a lot of white people aren't necessarily familiar with them, so they might not be able to pick up on some of the elements of her art. I think not only is that totally defensible, I think it's more understandable. But if you want it to be sort of like a punchy tweet, you know, I think you can just say a lot of people not understanding the black experience in my art. Maybe it's not for you or something. But when you're calling out white people
Why
specifically,
can't you just say it's not for white people? Like, why is that? Why is that okay? Being like, oh, there's people who don't understand this. You're saying like this isn't for white people. Why is that like a hill to die on? I don't understand.
Because it's racist. I don't think being an oppressor or the oppressed makes that type of behavior any more justifiable morally. Now, it is more
really
harmful, and I want to be clear on this. It's absolutely more
So, like, it
harmful
would be
when
better-
oppressor groups do this. I'm not denying
But
that. If like a
would
white
it be
person,
better if No Names said that it's better? Like this is for not for most white people, so that wouldn't have been racist. Saying it's not for white people is racist.
I guess the
Is that the
language.
distinction we're making?
I guess the language I would prefer is that
Kind
maybe a
of
lot of white
focuses.
people wouldn't understand this because it's informed by black experience. I mean, white people are
And
expected
so
to be.
since she didn't say it that way, she's a segregationist.
Well-
she should have worded it just slightly different.
Well,
she worded it a little bit different.
you
Then she
should
wouldn't be a
know this.
segregationist. But because she worded it that way, she's a segregationist.
Small differences in how you phrase things can be really important when you're talking about race issues. How many white people, like white
Oh, hi,
comedians or
Enderman.
politicians or whatever, have said statements that are basically the same, but one of them gets you canceled and one doesn't, you know?
Yep.
Like the difference between saying blacks and black people. That's an incredibly tiny difference in linguistics, but it leads to a massive change in the tone of a sentence.
Yep.
So yeah, I think when it comes to stuff like this, it's okay to critique huge public figures on the way in which they convey some of these arguments. Maybe
So,
that was just
do
a
you know
bad day for them.
why? Do you know why that's frustrating? Do you know why? Like, if people say like blacks versus black people, do you know why?
Yeah, I get that. The blacks just comes
Yeah.
off as kind of fundamentally dehumanizing. It sounds like
It sounds weird to me when people just say
It comes off
blacks.
like you're putting the demographic characteristic first and foremost, whereas black people is humanizing because, well, people is right there in the term.
So can you maybe like think about like the historical context of like the dehumanization of black people versus like the context of black people talking about white people, talking about racism? Like, can you understand like that how that context makes a difference and that it's a false equivalency to be like, oh, it's the same thing. if a white person, says like the blacks, versus if a black
Blacks.
person says white people.
So,
Can you understand that when people are saying white people, they're talking about an entire system that has created like a white identity.
That may be true,
right?
but that's
People
just
were always white.
Well, that is sometimes...
that was created in order to justify racism and slavery. Can you understand that, like, when you unpack that, it's a different story?
So, while that is
Jesus,
often the case,
so frustrating.
in critiques of whiteness, and by the way, when you're making systemic critiques, you say whiteness, not...
Oh, where'd you come from?
That when you do that, you're talking broadly about the institutional whiteness, rather than, like, white people as a racial group. The problem is...
Oh my God.
...that you're not really comfortable. But additionally, I think it's kind of silly to pretend that there aren't black people who just are kind of shitty to white people in a way that doesn't have a sort of institutional bias behind it. Again, I want to make it clear, the context that you're using to distinguish between those two things affect harm. But in terms of intent, there is nothing about being white that inherently makes you more racist. There are tons of black people who don't want their children intermixing with white children, like they don't want the interracial marriages.
Do you know how being white came about? Because you're saying that there's like nothing inherently racist about being white. Do you know how being white came about?
The race of being white. Whiteness is a... I wish you'd not patronize me.
Just like the construction of...
I wish you'd not patronize me. I'm a sociology major. I know.
I will just... Weren't you... Okay, just to clear it up, someone said that you were like a criminology major? Is that true, or like...
I participated in a criminological grad experiment and helped along with it significantly. I'm a sociology major.
So that was yours... So the sociology major and like the criminology thing are two separate things.
Yeah, it all bleeds together. That and communication.
I'm probably not gonna find that stuff ever.
Okay. I'll try not to be patronizing. I'll do my best.
You're gonna keep on doing it, Flowers.
I'll just talk about, like, what the white race is, because I was asking if you understand what that is, because you were saying that it's not like inherently racist.
Well, no,
what the fuck, bro?
Talk about that?
No. I was saying white people aren't inherently racist. There's nothing about being white that makes you inherently racist. I know that whiteness as a historical concept was constructed as a way of culturally and genealogically distinguishing Europeans from other groups of people, which they used as the foundation for epistemologically justifying the existence of racism and slavery. I understand that. I know that. But being white, a white person...
Literally,
oh my God.
There was even white people. There was just like European people colonizing America. They created the term white to make this distinction between indigenous people and to also justify slavery. And then that continued on for hundreds of years, where it's like being white was literally the construction of a caste system. So it's like that continued. So historically, yes, it's being white comes with all these racial issues. Well, and we want to get to the point where we deal with those racial issues.
That was good, man.
They all really can't be just people.
No, I agree with that. I'm just saying
that... Or is that like...
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to find that stuff.
I wasn't gatekeeping any of the things you said behind academic jargon. You don't need to ask me if it's okay. Look, I'm just saying I don't think that being racist...
stuff behind academic... This is critical race theory. This is why it's fucked up that it's banned, because you all need to read some critical race theory, okay? It wouldn't be academic jargon if you all just...
Do you know who you're talking to?
I've read it. I read it extensively before my debate with Charlie Kirk. I probably know a good deal about it relative to the average person. But I'm not talking about critical race theory.
Maybe it's not gatekeeping behind academic jargon.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, that stuff's gone.
I'm not
oh my God.
gatekeeping you. You asked me if I was okay with your definition when I never asked you for one. Look, the only point that I'm making here is that I do not think that white people are like the inherently racist group of people. For example, if you go over to China, it seems like, despite not being white, the Chinese people over there are pretty goddamn racist against black people, a group none of them have ever met. Well, most of them haven't met in person.
Yep.
Over here in America,
why is that?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the cultural context you're raised in. China's an authoritarian country, and they're also pretty rabidly xenophobic.
Yep.
Over here in America, there are a lot of black people that are racist against white people. I don't think that racism carries the same weight or harm.
A huge part of the world being racist towards black people comes from American media.
Yeah,
true.
I'm not a big America stan.
American media made by white people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I don't think white people are the only group that are racist. I think other people with other
Sure.
races are. So that's the point that I'm making. The reason why I'm being particular about No Name's language is because I think that all of us are capable of racial bias, and on issues that are sensitive like this, it's probably important to be
When
pretty
did she
particular.
say that people aren't? Like, I don't understand. When did No Name say that that the only racial biases that are ever had are by white people?
She didn't say that. That was the point I was making. She was just making an inarticulate statement that came off as kind of racially exclusionary to me, which I just don't think.
Are pronouns she? Or, like, did I get their pronouns wrong?
Whose pronouns?
No names. I just want to make sure I haven't been misgendering that person.
They,
is it?
Yeah, I didn't know what they are, if they were any. Chat, do you know?
Okay, I'll just say no name from now on, just in case, because I don't want to.
Okay, well, the
mess
point
it up.
that I'm making is we should all be careful when we talk about stuff like this. So when I would like to talk about, like, being careful, the language you used in your first video about me was explicitly...
Okay.
Wait, please let me finish.
Sorry, okay, sorry, I'm gonna let you finish.
The video that you did,
She's so condescending, bro.
On me, explicitly said that colonized people should have the right to choose whether to live with their oppressors. Now, when we're talking about live with, I assume you don't mean literally like room and board. I assume you mean a country. And that is explicitly an endorsement of ethno-nationalism, of deportation or genocide. There's no way to remove a large racial group from a country without genocide. There's just no way around it. You can't, like...
That's just not true. Like,
yes, it
is.
Examples
of people in Africa who... like in Kenya, for example, like the way they got colonized people out is they retook the businesses that colonized people took, and because they didn't have any economic interest in there, they left. Now that's still not separatism because there's still white people who live in Kenya, but they were able to...
To be specific, when you say that, do you mean all their possessions were seized and they were destitute and poor and had no choice but to leave the country? Because if that's the case...
businesses.
Well... Depending on how much of the business you seize, you can end up reappropriating the entire economic foundation of an ethnic group, which is what we've done to black people plenty of times in this country, so I know it works well at discouraging people from continuing to live in that area. This is fundamentally, like, I just, the idea of using state power to retaliate...
What
did you want Kenyans to do? Because, like, they didn't commit, like, mass genocide. They like kicked people out by like being like, hey, the stuff that you took from us, we're gonna take back. And now they don't have any power. A lot of people got out. Liberty, 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 liberty.
Oh, I'm going in circles.
Like, that's kind of ideal to me. It's like, what do you want colonized people to do? Like, be like, hey, you know what? You guys fucked us over. We're just gonna let you have the power that you still have. Like, what would you do?
So I don't know that much about the specifics of Kenya in this case. Without knowing more, I wouldn't be able to give like a really strong prescriptive solution here. But what you're talking about, if I'm reading correctly, this might not actually be the case, but it seems like
that stuff is gone, bro.
Discouraging white people from living there was economic retaliation, seizing properties owned by a given racial group, so that they would have to like leave the country. And I don't necessarily know if
that they already took. That they already took.
But who's they?
From that group.
Every individual or that race?
Britain colonized Kenya.
Britain's a country, but possessions were taken from people. You see the difference, right? You're doing the thing again. You're essentializing racial groups as a single homogeneous block of people from which all harm done and all harm done to are equivocable. Racial groups are made up of millions and millions of people. Some of the people there were probably fine anti-racists. Many of them probably weren't. You can't know. These broader attacks, saying you're taking it back from the people who took it to you, that's really weird to me, right? Like, at the end of the Civil War...
So why is it weird that literally this place was colonized, and the people who were the colonized people, like, we're gonna take our power back, so they took their power back. Like, that's where that ends there. It's not just like this arbitrary, like... the economic...
Oh my God.
What that means by take your power back, do we mean specifically target one racial group to reappropriate their resources at the exclusion of others? If that's the case, that seemed kind of bad, right? Because you're targeting a racial group for economic reappropriation. After the Civil War ended...
One example that I know of, I'm not an expert on Kenya or anything, but one thing that I know of is that people like bought out farms.
Why are we talking about Kenya then, if you... whatever.
And like the most fertile lands, it was owned by British colonialism. And then when Kenyans ended that, they took back that land. It's a specific example.
Sure.
So it's like, I don't see why that's like, I don't see why people taking their land back is just like, we can't even talk about that. And that's kind
every
of my
time
issue, is that there's like all these colonized people dealing with colonialism, and it's messy. There's a lot to critique about it. There's a lot of good things in there, but we need to be able to talk about it without literally trying to compare these people to white nationalists.
So every time
that's
you
really
say
all my point.
their land or taking it back from the colonizers, I wince, because what you're doing is you're taking harm done to a racial group and assigning it moral validity by addressing them as though they had individually committed the crimes you're associating them with, you know? And I think
Not even close to where I was. Lord have mercy. That's it. That stuff is gone, bro.
Get rid of the colonizers.
Okay, but
at that point, it doesn't matter. Like,
it does matter.
It doesn't matter if like they're like the original people who did it. The point is that it's still being colonized. And the people who are colonized are still dealing with colonialism, and those people need to get the colonists out. So
do you
it's
think
like
the Native Americans
I'm
should
sure
be
they're
able,
nice people.
Do you think the Native Americans should be able to seize the entirety of the United States of America because this was originally their land?
I honestly think that we should just give the land back to indigenous people, and I bet you they're not going to kick us all out.
What? How do you know? Oh my God.
You mean the entirety of the United States of America, the largest and most powerful country on earth? You want to get, the whole thing. You want to, do we still keep our democracy? Do the 330 million people in this country just suddenly now live under however reservations are governed? How do they organize that? Who gets which pieces of land?
I don't think I'm the person to ask. I think you should ask indigenous people.
Maybe you should ask indigenous people too before you even bring the subject up. This is your problem.
I don't think this is on the table or anyone would take it seriously.
I think indigenous people would think it's, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to speak for them, but I don't think they would laugh at getting their land back.
Well, land back is defensible, some parts of land, but the entirety of America? I don't think there are enough indigenous people left in America to even fill you know, because most of them died.
Maybe not.
Just like take everything.
I kind of think that's up to indigenous people, though. I don't want to like misspeak, so I'm not gonna, because they were colonized.
Do you think being the victim of oppression?
Because we're living on colonized land, because indigenous people are still trying to get much of their land back, and I think a lot of indigenous people don't necessarily want all of their land back either. And again, that's what I'm saying. Is like it's up to these people to determine, because it's actually theirs. And I think a lot of indigenous people don't want to do what white people think them.
Bro, I'm not even close. That's it.
Certain amount of land back because we've been put on reservations.
Out of curiosity, do you support Israel? Because that territory was originally theirs.
Israel is a lot more complicated than that territory originally being there. Like there's
is it more complicated, or are you just on the different end of that particular political question?
There's like it was like a multi-ethnic place of like different people groups living there.
And so and to be fair, so were the Americas. It's not like one tribe ruled America. The tribes that ruled the Americas before we came here conquered other tribes beforehand. So does America belong to the tribe that owned it last?
I don't even care if I die.
Tribes that we can ever anthropologically determine control the territory. These tribes were at war with each other.
Well,
sometimes.
I think like determining like how to give land back would be talking to the people who are still around, because a lot of people were wiped out. Having conversations of like, hey, this was your land. We want to give it back to you. What does that look like? I don't think it's just something where you like snap your fingers and it's like genocide.
Like there wasn't one indigenous people.
I'm talking about each. I literally said you would talk to the different groups of people who had land, because every people had different territories. I think it would look something like that, and I'm not really sure what it'd look like after that, because again, I think the instances of colonization are very different. I don't know about Germany.
This to me, the idea that land is forever yours.
How do we figure out how colonized people can have their lands back? I'm like, I think that looks like a very different conversation for each group of people who's been colonized, and I think all of them will have very different answers. My point is that they need to be listened to.
Yeah, to be clear.
Does that make sense?
True.
No, I think it's almost incoherent. So you'd make the argument that
it's almost
if you're
incoherent that I'm making the argument that colonized people should be able to determine what to do with colonization. So you can't understand that. It's an incoherent.
Yeah, because we have superseding laws and ethical structures that determine the extent to which anyone could do anything. We even have international law these days.
To another person.
So you have explicitly argued for ethno-states over the course of this discussion. I don't think an oppressed or colonized group has the right to build an ethno-state. I don't think that Saudi Arabia has a right to treat women the way they do just because they're an autonomous nation. I don't think Israel has a right to reclaim its territory just because 4,000 years ago they controlled that land. And I don't think the entirety of the United States of America should be ceded to the shattered, fragmented remains of what was once thousands of tribes across the entire world continents. I think that subjects on like the discussion
Oh
of
my
ethics in this is way
fucking
more complicated.
how?
And when you reduce it down to the colonized
That's
get
what
to
I'm
decide.
I'm not mad at Vaush. I'm just
That's
mad
what
at
I'm
this. How
saying.
But
how did I
your
lose this
answer is
ammo,
the
bro?
colonized get to decide, and I'm saying
Just
that
kill
is
me.
too
I quit.
simplistic. And not only is that more simplistic, that also implicitly defends a lot of really bad behavior potentially. Which is why in your video you said that the oppressed have a right to determine whether they would continue to live with their oppressors. And we know when you said that you didn't just mean buying out properties that were colonized so that the people left of their own volition. We know it doesn't end there. When state power is turned towards ethnically exclusionary
There's so
behavior.
many different endings, though. Like, if you look at colonized countries in Africa, there's so many different endings. And at the end of the day, I'm glad that those people are being decolonized.
But can't we decolonize without discriminating against another racial or ethnic group?
It's not discrimination if you're literally just trying
I think
to
I
take
just
your
found
power
it, but it's too late.
back. Discrimination
Wait,
would
it
be oppressing
absolutely
people.
can be. Wait, by taking your power back, you mean selectively stripping power from another ethnic group.
The
That's
people who colonized you.
Yeah.
The ethnic group that colonized you. That context is a little important, right?
No, it functionally isn't. You keep
No, it's not
essentially
important.
implying that it's okay to engage in retribution. If you've been colonized, you've
As
been
long as
It's not
that ethnic
retribution,
group,
it's
you know,
literally
participated
trying
in
to have your
something.
own self-determination. That's what it is.
That's
That's
what
the
white
context of what I'm
nationalists
talking
Even
about.
if all of them didn't
right
do
there.
that, or they're just
Self-determination
descendants
is the
of people that
dogma
did
that
that,
they use when talking
as long
about
as they're part of the
ethnostates.
ethnic
This
group
is
that
They're
did it,
talking
it's
about
perfectly
self-determination
fine.
in the context of other people being inferior inherently. They're about self-determination in the context of wanting to have their own state because they're looking down on other people.
Haven't you listened
right?
to Richard
people
Spencer?
who are oppressed talking. I've heard of plenty of
Richard Spencer doesn't
people
think
who are
the other
oppressed
races are
need
inferior.
to
He
have
just
their own
thinks that
self-determination, and the reason why they're oppressed is because they don't have their own self-determination. The reason why I'm using that term is because it looks so different in every country, and I think people need to have the space to talk about that and to figure it out without being called a white nationalist.
So again, I don't have a problem with talking about it. It's just a lot of your language
like you're
comes off.
literally
Wait, can we please?
doing it right now.
Wait,
You're
hold
like,
on.
you're a white nationalist.
I'm literally talking about it right now.
Richard
But
Spencer said this and
hold
that.
on,
It's like,
please.
I know.
So when you're saying we have a right to discriminate against this racial group to preserve the self-determination of our people, yeah, that does sound a little white nationalisty. So you'll have to forgive me for
It's
drawing
not
that.
to preserve.
Please.
It's not just to preserve
Please.
self-determination. Okay, sorry. Go on. Go
Okay.
ahead. Go on.
I do not think that the road to decolonization and the road to ethnic discrimination are necessarily the same roads. I think you can decolonize a place without using it to justify racially exclusionary behavior, which is, by the way, by definition, what black separatism is. If it wasn't black separatism, if it wasn't racially exclusionary, then you could just say, we want to build a democracy and make sure power is equally distributed among the people. But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about discouraging, and that's a very generous term, by the way, one racial group from continuing to live in your society. And it never just ends, by the way, at we bought out their territory and they just leave. When a colonizing
Yes, it
group,
does.
when a
This literally
colonizing
happened.
when a
In Kenya.
colonizing group lives
They
in
got the white people out, and they're like, good. They got the people who colonized them out, and they're like, great.
do you think
That's
it's interesting
where it
that you
stopped.
refer to them as white people before you refer to them as colonizers? It speaks to your priorities somewhat.
No, because white people have. What? Who are the colonizers in this world? Yeah, there are other people who have done it, but look at all
the
the
white
places that have
people-
been colonized.
are
Africa,
all the white people
India,
colonizers?
America.
Are
Yes,
all the white
according to
people
her,
colonizers?
yes.
In
White
Kenya?
people are a part of colonialism.
Wait,
The colonizers are
you're
white
doing it
people.
again. Wait, hold on. So are all the white people in South Africa colonizers?
Vaush, I am so sorry that I misspoke. I meant the white colonizers. I didn't mean to say all white people. My bad. Oops, I guess I'm a racist.
It is, well,
Yeah,
it
you
is
kind
an
of are.
interesting term of phrase. It'd be pretty big difference it'd be a difference, for example, like how you
I think it's
refer to
interesting that you
criminality.
don't get white people people refer to white people as colonizers when white people are the ones colonizing the world. I think that's interesting.
Generally speaking,
that.
the people who are no, I do get it. I just think it makes you insufferable and sociologically ignorant.
Yes.
Now I'll ask you again. When it comes to South Africa, what do you think of the 6 million white people who live in that country? Do you think the black people, who are by far the majority, have a right to remove the white population?
I personally don't think that would be a good idea, but I do think that
do they have a right
it's up to. Yeah, I think so. I think they have the right to discuss what to do about that, and if that means that they have to remove the people, then I think that they would have a right to do that. But I think that would be really harsh, and I think that they're not even.
It would be harsh, which is why they don't have the right to do it. So shut up.
How many Jews died in the Holocaust?
I think 6 million.
Do you know what Hitler tried to do with them before the Holocaust began?
See, this is what I'm saying. Like, me being like, people should have the right to self-determination.
Answer the question.
You are literally comparing me to Hitler and Nazis right now.
Answer the question. What did he try to do before he killed them?
I'm not going to answer the question because you literally are proving my point.
Nah,
because
you're proving his by not answering the question.
Did Jewish people colonize Germany?
You keep saying that. I don't think it's relevant. Jewish people in Germany.
The context of colonialism
Jewish
is
people.
really relevant.
Jewish people.
Why we're talking about
Jewish people in Germany.
I'm not saying that people should just remove anyone. I'm
Jewish
saying
people in Germany. Jewish people in
colonialism
Germany were innocent, regular people, and white people in South Africa are innocent, regular people. The seeds of colonization are a sociological phenomena that runs back hundreds of years. It's not like there are 6 million people who are born white and thus instantly become colonizers. You are doing exactly what I accuse people like you of doing. You're essentializing racial differences and turning them into grievances that state power can be used to solve.
But the issue is that there's like a power dynamic of white people running South Africa.
Okay, but this is
again, who are colonized get their power back. Nothing they should do genocide, but people should be able to have a conversation about what to do to have their own self-determination, to be able to live their lives without colonial oppression, live their lives without racism.
Can we achieve those things without generalizing an entire race of people?
Without genocide. Removing all the white people is not the only way of fixing that problem. You know that, right? And by the way, I mean, you know what?
Saying, Vaush, oh my god,
that
is actually what I'm trying to say. That there's like different. I'm not saying that people should just commit genocide. I'm saying there's so many different responses to colonization.
You
and people
said they would have the right to remove
what
them.
To do.
You said they would have the right to remove them.
I think if they decided like, hey, we don't want the people who colonized us to stay here, let's figure out a way to like have them move or something like that. I think that'd be very harsh. Again, that's something that
there are going to be a lot of people that say no, and that'll be that's basically going to be a war right there. I'm sorry.
People who colonized them.
Okay, so out of curiosity,
I think you're also like
you're not going to like remove an entire race of people without some opposition. Or war.
Do they not have
I'm sorry.
To self-determine their moral system with regards to
see, like gay people are oppressed, though.
Wait, hold on. No, they're not. Gay people in Saudi Arabia are just a product of Western degeneracy that feeds in through global media. In reality, it's actually a product of white international cultural bias that is infesting the people in Saudi Arabia. So, given they're basically a symptom of Western degeneracy, do you think they not have a right to address that in whatever way they think is most culturally effective?
I think that's not really what we're talking about.
Your arguments are used by every tyrannical group around the world.
What I'm talking about is
oh my God,
people who are colonized having the self-determination where they can have the same equal amount of power.
But
they can have equality again.
Everyone calls themselves colonized. This is what you don't get. Every oppressor has called themselves oppressed.
Not everyone is colonized, though.
It doesn't
matter. You can
matter.
look at the historical record and determine who's colonized or not. Like, people are going to say stuff, and then there's history. There's things that actually happened.
What you're saying is that any state that can justify its sense of persecution therefore has a right to engage in genocide against ethnic minorities within their borders. Every tyrannical regime does this. No tyrannical regime in history has ever said, yep, we're on top, we're the bad guys, we're just killing for fun. They always construct a narrative of persecution, and whether that narrative is correct or not really doesn't make much of a difference.
Do you think
especially
that
since
Africans who are colonized are constructing? They're just like making up a narrative of oppression. Do you
I
think
literally-
indigenous people are making
He's
up a
not
narrative of
saying
oppression?
that
Do you
at
think
all.
Hawaiians are making
That
up
is
a
a straw
narrative of
man.
oppression? Do you think
just
black
said-
people are making up a narrative of oppression?
I literally just said that it's irrelevant, and that while the degree to which it is true
Why
doesn't affect
is the
state
context of
justification.
oppression irrelevant? Why is the context of who has power irrelevant?
Because, and I'll say it once more, and this is why you should really check your racism, my friend.
Really?
That white people and colonizers aren't the same group.
They're not.
People who are white in South Africa are regular humans who are dead, who live their lives. They are not physical.
Colonization is
they
still
are
happening.
not
Like,
physical.
America.
How do you?
Yes,
It's
the
still a
concept
colony.
of colonization is happening. You do not then get to attack 6 million ethnic minorities in a country. That's what you're doing. You're taking a sociological problem and making it a race problem, which is, by the way, what conservatives do to black people. You can take a look at the statistics.
I'm not
Hold on.
So
Hold
is
on.
It, is,
Let me
okay,
finish,
fine,
please.
Go on.
Conservatives do this all the time. Black on black crime is wildly disproportional in this country. I recognize this as a sociological phenomenon.
What does
but
black on black
conservatives-
crime have to do with
You
Let
just
him
said
go
you'd let me
on.
finish. Maybe you'd understand if you'd let me finish. But conservatives essentialize it, saying that it's a black problem. You're doing this with colonization, where colonization is a massive, globe-reaching sociological problem that is
And
influenced
I'm
by
saying that
and
colonization
influences
is the
people.
problem
That is influenced
because
by
they're still being colonized.
and influences people. That doesn't mean every individual who's in a country that was colonized by a person of their race makes them a colonizer. Those
It
aren't the
really
same
doesn't.
things.
They were
You're
just born here,
essentializing
that's
to race
it.
and
Yeah,
There's
justifying
nothing
they're
else
still
to it.
colonizers, Vaush.
No.
They're still colonizers.
It's not their fault
South
they're
Africa
here.
is
They
still
were born
colonized.
here.
America is still being colonized. There's still a colonization issue. For you to say that they're not colonizers is to act as if everything's fine.
You're telling me
Not.
the fact that
There's
they
a
live here is a
colonization.
it means that they're colonizing. Got
Do you
it.
think
That
they're
is the
only
dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Like, do you think that black
I
crime
don't
is
think
just
they're
a
the
bunch of
only
black
the
people?
individual. But do you
By
really
the
think that
definition,
there's
I'm
not
colonizing by being here
issue?
because I was
Do you
never.
really think that people do
Black
have an
people were not
autonomy right
this
now?
here in the
so
first
this
place.
is
We were brought
where
here.
I'm starting to wonder if you're educated enough to have this conversation. You keep talking about colonization,
Wow.
the socioeconomic phenomenon, and relating it to the actual lives of the millions of people in that country. Those aren't the same things. The sociological
But the issue is
phenomenon
there's,
of
like,
crime
literally
is not the
power
same as
in
the
the
people
hands
in this country.
of the people who colonize them. That's the issue. The power is still in the hands of the people who colonize that
And a lot
place.
of crime is
And
done
that's
by
what we're talking
black
about
people in the
colonization.
U.S. And a lot of crime is done by black people in the U.S. A massively disproportional amount. So, like,
The crime
crime.
that black people have done in the U.S. is nothing compared to the
That's
slavery
not what he's
colonization that's
saying.
happened.
Now,
The
that
fact
has
that you
nothing
think that's comparable, the fact
You
that
can't
you think that's
respond.
comparable says a lot about you.
You
You're
can't
not even
respond to the
responding to
direct
his
point. You
actual
just-
points
what
that he's
about
making.
The next thing, you don't
What's your
understand the
direct?
relationship.
You want to about black people on crime? What the
Do you
fuck are you
understand
doing?
what the relationship was?
Explain the relationship, because I'm really curious to think how this is on topic.
It is.
You really didn't understand. Okay,
That's what
The-
I'm saying.
the
If you
problem-
can explain how those things connect, then maybe we can continue talking.
the problem I
What?
have
You
is
are
that
so
white
condescending.
people colonized South Africa a really long time ago. White people that live today in South Africa are just people. They're not like soldiers in the imperialist army. They're just people. Colonization is a
they
construct.
are just people
hold
who
on.
are still colonizing South Africa.
So you're doing it again. So what you're saying when you like make this point is that you don't think white people have a place in South Africa, which is again one of the reasons why I also think you're basically
I don't think they have a place in South
indistinguishable.
Africa as a
Can you
colonizer.
ever let me finish a point? So when you're saying a white person in South Africa means they're a colonizer, you're essentially saying white people have no place in South Africa, that there's no ethical way for a white person to be in South Africa, and that's blood and soil.
Just
No,
because of their
I'm saying-
ancestors.
That's blood and
No, that's
soil.
essentially what you're
Really not
saying.
what I'm saying, you know?
That's what
All
you're
this talk
implying.
about, like, oh, you
Literally.
don't understand me. Like, you're responding to a straw man, because that's not what I'm
The
saying.
reason I brought
You've been
up
doing
black
nothing but
crime in the
strawmans this
States
entire
is
time,
because you're
woman.
demonstrating an inability to differentiate sociological phenomena from the behavior of people who contribute to it. There is a lot of black on black crime in the US, but I don't consider that to be a black problem inherent to black people who will do it as long as there are black people in our cities. I think it's a sociological phenomena that interweaves our communities, that affects and is affected by people of all races, much like colonization. The people who are in South Africa today who are white did not lead the boats of the, what was it, the Dutch, all the way down to the Cape and then
But they are
themselves
still
conquer.
profiting off of colonization.
And there are black people
They
in
might not be the
American
people who are
cities
on
that
the
profit
boats.
from gang
They're
violence.
still profiting off of colonizing millions of people.
You still don't understand.
And
there are
that's
black people
structure
in
that is
America.
still existing.
You don't understand. Still, there are black people in America that profit off of gang violence. The drugs that get funneled into the country that they sell, there are plenty of black people who make a living off of it.
Unfortunately,
Does that
true.
make it a black problem? No, you're making the essentialist argument. Like, I actually do think you're making like a racially essentialist argument. Like, you're fundamentally tainted by the same type of ideological worldview that like 18th century
really
scientists
like,
would have used.
People who are South Africans are there for the most part, who are white South Africans are there for the most part directly because of colonialism.
What is that?
And
so 300 years ago, their dad showed up and they were born 18 generations later, and that means they're a colonizer?
And they're still profiting off of colonialism.
How?
They're still creating racist structures. Like, apartheid ended,
The politicians are, I guess, the people in power are, I guess, not the people in the trailer homes that are just living.
Colonial structures ended. That's what they're still dealing with. And that's why I'm saying that South Africa have to still figure out what to do about colonization.
I never said racism just
there.
ended. You don't seem to be following what I'm talking about. There are black people in South Africa who also profit off of the colonization that took place. It's not like the system that was built exclusively was built to the benefit of white people. There were superstructures formed where the black majority population would find ways to leech wealth from that system too.
I officially take back what I said about Vaush being too aggressive. She's so infuriating. I can understand why he was.
Off of a system that, for the most part, disproportionately affects black people, and that system is still running today. The colonization didn't stop, and I don't think you get that actually.
And now there
I
are
don't think
white
you understand that just because colonization happened a few hundred years ago means that it's over. It means that white people still participate.
Oh my God!
Still participating in it.
Strong man is strong with this one.
To figure out how to end it and have their own.
Can I ask you a direct question? Have I at any point during this conversation said colonization and racism are over in South Africa? Have I said that at any point during this conversation?
You did try to actually say
that
it happened, colonization happened
incorrect.
Ago, and that I can't somehow break apart the fact that colonization happened and that white people are literally colonizers.
I encourage you to review this VOD.
Because what I'm saying is that they're still profiting off of colonization.
I encourage you to review this VOD. I have never said anything of the sort. The point that I'm making is that the moral culpability of the act of colonization is not one which is currently being borne by the majority of white South Africans. I'll ask you another direct question. Do you think
But the thing is,
it's
those
possible
people are not trying to dismantle the powers of
do you think
colonization.
Those 6 million people, you know that? Have you talked to them? Or are you making a group generalization about a race again?
Like you've been doing this entire time.
Most of the people are not trying to dismantle the powers of colonization.
I'll ask you another question. Do you think it's possible for a white person to live ethically in South Africa?
Just say no.
I already actually said that.
No, you don't believe
how
that.
Would they do so?
I think they can live there ethically by, this is my thoughts on it. I'm not South African, so I don't want to speak for South African people. But I think that if they lived there, tried to also fight against the racist structures that are still in place, tried to fight against colonialism, try to give back to black communities, I think that would be an ethical way to live there.
Okay, so what if they did that and the state tried to deport them anyway? You've called them a colonizer, by the way. You've said that the white people in South Africa are a colonizer. You don't know how many of them are already doing that. You have no goddamn idea. But you painted the whole racial group as existing current colonizers anyway.
Yep.
Which implicitly suggests they're not capable of living
There's no ethical way for them to actually live in that area. It's because you painted them all as instantly colonizers. By that definition, there literally is no ethical way they can live there.
Do you think you could do it without deporting a race? Do you think that's possible?
I think you could, and that's what I've been saying this whole time.
Then it's unethical to then do a genocide. If you have the ability to fix the power differential without genocide, but then you do genocide anyway, that's pretty bad, right?
I would say so, yeah. But I also think a lot of people aren't doing that. I think a lot of people who are figuring out how to get rid of colonialism,
they're not obligated
it's
to.
Complicated. There's the
no people that are just trying to live their life are not obligated to. I'm sorry.
They had to kill a lot of people, but they also were parts of ending British colonialism. Like, what I'm saying is that colonialism is very messy, and there's instances where it's ideal if people can end it peacefully. There's instances where it hasn't been peaceful, and I think it's like, who are you to judge? Because you're not the person who's been colonized. That's what I'm getting.
Judge. Yeah, I'll judge. I judge the Israelis for how they treat the Palestinians. Yeah, I do actually think that members of oppressed groups can do morally wrong things. I do believe that.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are people, there are all these different countries who have dealt with colonialism in a multitude of different ways. And sometimes it's been violent, and luckily sometimes it hasn't been. And my point is that people need to determine that. We need to look at each situation and the situation that people are in, because again, we're talking about various different countries.
So what
we're
if
not just talking about like monolithic people.
What if people thought within a country that the only way for them to escape colonialism, read racial diversity in their country, was through the wholesale slaughter of the white people who lived there? Do you think that would be justified? Like, if they were like, this is how we're determining our decolonization, would you have a problem with that?
I think that would be pretty messed up, actually. Again, like, I'm not a separatist, but I think people should decide what they need to do. And I also think realistically that just would never happen.
You keep saying that. People need to decide what they need to do.
You think it's bad, but you think they have a right to
so vague.
I think that it depends what the situation is. Like, if that's the only way to get colonizers out, then okay. But again, when you look at people who've been colonized, that's just not what they do. They try to take the power. They try to take the power away by taking their businesses back, for example.
Okay, I know how it's normally done, because I don't think most of them are as psychotic as the limits of your moral philosophy would allow. But you're saying essentially that you would be okay with them, like, that's just an okay to you? Like, oh, we killed millions of people because of their race, and I don't necessarily like that, but I think they had a right to do that? Is that what
that's what your that's what our whole argument is.
Anti-colonialism. What about what Assad does in Syria? Or what about what China does to the Uyghur Muslims? How far do these limits go? What about the...
Okay, well, say then I don't think it's right to just slaughter a bunch of people. That does seem really fucked up, but I think that people should be able to
finally got it.
Get rid of their colonizers.
Took you long enough, but you finally got there.
What about getting rid of colonization? Wouldn't it be better to talk about the idea rather than talking about first essentializing an entire racial group as agents of a sociological force and then treating them as the enemy that need to be excised? Wouldn't it be better to treat it like what it actually is, a political force?
I don't really understand the difference that you're making.
That's very telling. Okay,
that explains a whole lot.
You know how after the Weimar Republic fell, there was a narrative in Germany that Jews were responsible for the loss of World War I because they had financed foreign banks in the efforts against the fatherland?
Sorry, say that again.
You know how after World War I, there was a rumor in the Weimar Republic, a commonly held narrative, that Jews were responsible in part for Germany's loss because they had financed foreign banks and economically depreciated the country?
I didn't know that.
Well, don't you think it might have been a little bit better if they had said, hey, we should do something about banking and its effect on our country, and not, hey, we should do something about the ethnic group of people we associate with the banking? Like, the former situation seems like, even in the worst case scenario, it leads to much less harm, you know? Like, it's a less destructive road to go down, even if it's fundamentally a delusional belief. Like, isn't that a better road?
I just don't really see why you can't talk about colonization in the context of the people who are colonizing them. I don't really see why that would be a better road to go down. Like,
should we talk about crime in relation to the races that do it here in the United States?
Right, but then you look at the context of like the history that like Black people are put in, the kind of environments that like poor Black people have to deal with, and so like when you're talking about like the crime
now we're talking about socioeconomic forces. See, this is what I mean. When it comes to stuff that Black people do, you're willing to say, well, look past the people and look at the sociological forces. But when it's white people, you'll only say, well, I don't see what the problem is with essentializing a sociological force to a racial group.
No, I'm saying that the continuation of colonization exists. It exists in these countries where people are still being colonized. people have to figure out how to deal with colonialism. They'll have to figure out how their own self-determination to figure out what's going to happen.
We have to find out how to deal with crime. That's a responsibility of the American people. How do we deal with crime? Now, here's the question.
I think if you redistribute wealth, that would probably help with crime.
Do we talk about crime as though it is a innate product of a given racial group? Or do we talk about it as though it's a sociological force? That's a critical distinction right there. And I don't know why you're not willing to afford that shared ability when white people are the ones predominantly responsible for doing something bad elsewhere.
Because black people do it good, white people do it bad.
Blood and soil.
Because white people are the ones who are colonizing the world.
Black people are the ones who are shooting each other in the streets of Detroit.
Right, but in the context of history, black people, that's happening because of the poverty and the situations that's happened through racism.
And in the context of history, the white people,
history are white people colonizing different countries, and so
yeah. Well, why did the white people do that?
Because they wanted resources.
No, the actual colonizers were usually poor.
White people didn't colonize people because they didn't want resources.
I'm sorry. Was every person who
thought it was really nice looking, so they just came there?
Oh my God!
Was every person in South Africa, every white person who went there, the king? No. Most of them were poor feudal serfs who joined the military because they got nothing more than a bowl of soup and a loaf of bread every day. Hold on. And in the service of their lord's army, they were sent out on a transoceanic, journey to enforce the monarchical will of their king, often at pain of death if they failed to. There were many mutinies. There were plenty of people who killed each other because they weren't willing to or want to do the stuff they ended up being forced to do. So actually, the white people who colonized were just products of the sociological context of where they came from. You could do this forever. No group is more inherently evil than any other group.
Nope.
If you run it back far enough, everyone does bad things because they were put under circumstances that leads to that. So you're not willing to afford that shared ability.
White people the socioeconomic power to oppress black people, and white people still participate in that.
And black people in inner cities kill and menace lots of people with crime.
Vaush, you really should stop talking about that one, because it's such a.
Why do white people colonize?
With the situations of poverty. White people colonized because they wanted more resources. Not
it's a good analogy, but she's not going to accept that, especially when it hits so close to home.
Every soldier who was sent there? You're doing it again.
Literally profiting off of that land.
You're doing it again. Whenever we talk about non-white people,
profiting off of that land.
Whenever we're talking about non-white people,
I'm doing the thing where I'm saying that the white people who colonized places were profiting off of that land. That's what I'm doing.
Why do you like to simplify everything in such? Oh God!
South Africa got rich. The thousands of people that got sent over on boats. Do you think every single one of them became rich? No, a tiny percentage of the bourgeois or the feudal aristocracy got
resources away. From the people who live there.
Why do you
people who? What do you mean? How can you not keep track? I'm talking about people who have colonized countries.
All of them? Or the bourgeois?
All
the aristocracy?
The people who colonized the countries, the rich people and the poor people who moved there too, are profiting off of colonization.
Okay, and black people in the U.S. profit off
Vaush,
the black criminals.
That's really gonna tick her. That's only gonna piss her off more. Stop.
Completely incapable of applying sociological context to white people when you are like non-white people. I do unironically think you're racist.
She is.
I know that you think I'm racist. I already talked about it in my video. But what I don't understand is that you can't admit that people who have colonized countries are profiting off of that. And that's a problem.
I'm sorry. Hey,
I don't understand why you're trying to go hard on me.
Chat, at any point during this convo, have I ever said that colonizers haven't profited from colonization, or is this another point that was made up at some point? Yeah, I didn't think so either. No,
honestly,
the argument I'm making.
If you can understand that, then maybe you can try to understand why people who are colonized still need to attack the system of colonialism.
We're not
the system is still there, and that's what I'm getting at.
I'm all for attacking the system.
I don't understand what you're talking about.
I know you don't. I am all for attacking the system of colonialism. I am against essentializing it as a product of a given racial group. This is a one-to-one comparison that you don't seem to understand.
So much of Europe colonized Africa. You can't think of that as an issue of a racial group.
I mean, can you think of black crime as like an issue of a racial group here in the US? It is demographically like a racial issue.
It's an issue of racism. which is caused by white people.
Wait, okay,
yes.
hold on. So in that case, even though black people are responsible for a disproportionate amount of violent crime in the U.S., you're willing to say it's not the race, it's the system of racism. But then when it comes when it comes to colonialism, you'll say, no, what's wrong with just saying white people are all the colonizers? You say you're fighting colonialism.
It's better to generalize white people than it is to generalize black people, apparently.
You're just fighting white
colonized people.
I honestly don't think you give a fuck about the colonized. I just think that you're enacting some kind of petty revenge fantasy where you know that you've been the victim of racism your whole life, and it gives you, like, I don't know.
Vaush is hitting a little bit too close to home. Careful. You're treading dangerous ground, my friend.
One-to-one comparison that you can't...
And you want me to say that it's just like the kings and queens who are colonizers. Is that the issue?
I didn't say it was the kings and queens who are colonizers. You kept saying they wanted to get wealthy.
You're saying that white people are colonizers. Can you help me understand?
Okay.
Help me understand why that's the issue.
Do you think black people are criminals?
Can you use a different example?
No, because this is directly one-to-one, and you won't accept it because you are fundamentally unwilling to give the white people the charity you give the non-white people. This is a direct comparison. We have a racial group that is disproportionately responsible for a negative thing.
There are black people who are criminals, and there are white people who are colonizers.
Yeah.
So, like,
you're close.
So there are black people who are criminals. Would you be okay with me saying stuff like, crime is a black problem in the United States? We need to deal with black people and their crime.
Well, what's the cause? What is the root cause?
Okay. Exactly. No, you're on the right path right there.
What's the cause of crime?
So you ask what is the cause, and then you get to talking about the real issues below the surface level, like racism and economic deprivation and inequality. I agree with that completely. So with let's do it again, except in South Africa, okay? So I could say white people are colonizers. They're colonizing South Africa. And then you could say...
She doesn't want to engage. She's so condescending. She does not want to engage. She's desperate to be right.
White people, and they are the
God, it's so bad.
Responsible for colonization. But not all white people are colonizers.
She knows what she's supposed to say there. She doesn't want to say it. She doesn't want to prove herself wrong.
So maybe we go below the surface level and we talk about the underlying issue, like colonization and the systemic problems that lead to that, which are not, by the way, white people being bad. The systemic problems that led to that, when it happened back in the day, was European colonialism, and before that, an asymmetric distribution of technological development, and before that, you go to the root of feudalism itself. There's always broader context, but let's not essentialize it as a race thing.
Right, but the issue is that white people, even if they came to South Africa later on, are still benefiting off of colonialism.
But there are black people who...
and then white people don't want to give up their power. But black people benefiting from crime is not an example of black people having power.
That's not the point.
Gaining from colonialism is an issue of
It's a sin they're committing based because of their disenfranchisement.
Situation. You think that black people who are committing crime have the power in their lives?
So what you're doing right now, and I feel like we've been running in a circle, and I guess we're not going to agree. What you're doing right now is the essential logic of the white nationalist, which is that when you go past all of the moral arguments, the fundamental thing comes down to this. We have a grievance, and our grievance entitles us to essentialist treatment of other groups. I don't think that the system of ethics fundamentally changes depending on how colonized the people are who we're referring to. You take it all into consideration. The ethical system stays the same. And in my case, I'm being consistent. You attack the issue, not people most associated with the issue based on race. But in your case, you think that a feeling of grievance entitles you to racial essentialization. And unfortunately, this is the logic. It's not a feeling of grievance. It's the fact that
these people have been colonized, and they should have the right to be able to get...
It's not the feeling of grievance.
It's
grievance that I have. I know.
Colonization.
This is fundamentally the logic, the language that people engage in. If you want to, I encourage you to go back.
White talk about how colonized people shouldn't be colonized. That's the engagement here.
Yes.
That's what white people are talking about. White nationalists really believe that we should get rid of all the colonization. That's what white nationalists are.
White nationalists tend to be ultra isolationists who argue that the immigration of black and brown people into the U.S. is a form of colonization pushed on us by the Jewish people who have controlled our banks and our government and our culture. They directly use the language.
I've also heard white nationalists say that South Africa should be colonized because they believe that black people aren't capable of having their own self-determination.
No, every white nationalist that I've ever talked to has bitten the bullet and said Africa for Africans, Europe and America for white people.
Yeah.
So if anything,
this always that simple.
Which is why Marcus Garvey liked the KKK, by the way.
I haven't actually heard white nationalists say that. And also, Marcus Garvey didn't like the KKK. Marcus Garvey talked to the KKK and said, hey, you don't want us here, we don't want to be here. And that's not the same thing.
No, it's, I mean, liked, and we both want to kick black people out of the U.S. It seems like a...
I
think that's not actually the framing of what happened. What happened is Marcus Garvey was like, he is a separatist, again, which I don't believe in, but Marcus Garvey was like, hey, we don't want to be here anymore because living with white people is really hard. You don't want us to be here, so let's help us get out.
Did you know I recently argued with some neo-Nazis who said that did they actually call out Marcus Garvey? They actually said black separatists were the truest representations of black people. I was talking with Eric Stryker, I think, and James Alsop, formerly a large Nazi YouTuber, and they were arguing that the true representatives of black interest were black separatists because they shared the argument that white and black people were culturally distinct and not capable of living together. So the arguments that white nationalists and black separatists use are identical. The conspiracy theories vary, and the aggrieved and the victors vary. Of course, we're talking about different groups, but the logic is the same. Like the Black Hammers.
There are definitely like a lot of black separatists who, again, as we've already said, are anti-Semitic, homophobic, and they definitely do fall along those lines. There's also black separatists who just want to be away from the people who oppress them.
Yeah, but if black people want to leave, if black people want to leave the US,
hey, if white nationalists and black people want to leave, or just like black nationalists just want to leave and go to a different place away from here, especially the white nationalists, because Jesus, those guys are kind of just
like, I think maybe at the end
weird.
Of the day, we can agree that, like, okay, mass genocide.
Go establish your own country on an island somewhere.
We agree on that, and I think that, like,
see how far you get.
No, I'm saying that, like, the thing that I'm just defending is saying that when people are colonized, sometimes there's violence, sometimes there's civil war. Well, and I'm saying, like, maybe that has to happen to decolonize themselves.
We're not talking, you didn't say, sometimes there's violence. You said, no, I saw your video.
You said, you're like, what happened with Hitler? He killed 6 million people. So you think it'd be right to just kill 6 million people? And I was like, you know what? I actually don't think that's right. But the thing that I'm defending is that there are people who don't want to live with people who oppress them. And that looks very different when you look at all these different countries that have been colonized. Again, some people have done that peacefully, and that's great. They're able to end colonialism peacefully. And then other people, there were civil wars. You know what I'm saying? And like, people need to have the space to figure that out.
Yeah, I understand decolonization can be a bloody project.
And that's the point that I'm defending.
Well, no, the point that you made was that oppressed people have a right to physically excise the race they associate with their oppressors. If they seize control of a state.
Yeah, you were completely in favor of that.
Undeniably, and mass deportation of people, at the very least, counts as a cultural genocide. Human definitions vary. Which I just don't think is defensible.
Not everybody's going to be willing to leave, and it's going to be
if they want to live
bad.
Colonize them or not.
That's what I just said.
There's like a lot of different ways that looks like.
I don't know how to spell amethyst.
And I think I probably will draw the line at genocide. How about that?
Well, I think
genocide is wrong. But I think there's like a lot of different ways that can look like, besides like mass deportation. Like, I keep on giving you like a couple of different examples. And it's like, those are the examples that I'm talking about.
I know, it's just you already defended it, though. You are in the context of South Africa, where there are 6 million.
Well, I'm not defending genocide over here. I'm like, yeah, you know what, that is a lot.
You said you defended their right to live without their colonizers, which means mass deportation at the least violent, which means genocide.
No, again, I said that Kenya got rid of colonization by taking back their farms, for example. They took back their businesses to the point where the people who colonized and didn't have any power, so they left.
The whole race left?
Like, that's one example.
How many of them were there?
A lot of them left. It's not a separatist place. I don't know. Let's look up how many people colonized Kenya. Probably a lot.
I can't comment on the Kenya stuff because I don't even know anything about it, to be honest with you.
Wikipedia isn't helping me out that much with this one.
You really do be like that, bro.
The whole history of Kenya, huh?
Yes.
Somebody in chat just said 200 million. That seems unlikely to me. I don't know the particulars about Kenya. I'm only saying that genocide is probably pretty bad. and I
We
guess
can
I
agree on
stand by that point.
like
Yeah, but
that's not
you still
really
do so much racial
like
essentialization.
again, you're like attacking a straw man. It's like, great, we can all agree that genocide is bad.
You've been attacking a straw man this whole time. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Themselves. It looks like a lot of different things, and people have to have the ability to have the conversation and the space to have a conversation. But and there's also an issue. Anyone talks about like racialized issues, like with No Name, for example. No Name will just be like, this tweet isn't for you. While talking with white people, like, oh, you're a segregationist.
It is a segregation.
You're just like talking out all these terms. You know what I'm saying?
I think I can defend the terms that I use.
St. Andrew of wanting to have a race war.
I would need
you see what I'm saying?
God,
it's like that is
that's a build up of magna cubes.
He's
Jesus.
talking about No Name in one video, and then the next video St. Andrew comes on where you and St. Andrew talk about No Name and St. Andrew's and St. Andrew's tweet. It's in that video.
Oh
like
yeah, I lost all the bricks. Of course.
So it's like, again, okay, genocide's wrong, but you need to understand that there's the way that people decolonize themselves looks really different. That there are wars even. So hold on. That needs to be okay.
So we're moving off these points so far and so fast. You're like backpedaling like crazy. We need to address a couple of fundamental.
I'm not really backpedaling. I'm trying to establish that thing because you're accusing me of saying that I'm cool with genocide, and that's never a claim that
the video. I don't even need to cite the video. In the course of this conversation, you have explicitly said you would be okay with the deportation of an ethnic minority if they were responsible for colonizing the country. You said that in this context, so I don't even need to cite anything else. Maybe you moved off that point, in which case, congratulations. You also keep essentializing behavior of white people as a group to white people as individuals, where broader socioeconomic problems that are disproportionately exhibited by white people then become white problems, which again, you would not tolerate if I talked about crime and black people in that way, for good reason, because it's unhelpful.
But she's not going to engage with that because it's too...
I'm okay with
I don't know, it makes too much sense for her.
Colonize them. In the context of colonialism, I'm okay with people who are colonized being like, we need to get rid of the people who have colonized us.
Yeah, so, right.
Yeah, okay.
The argument is not biased enough for her taste.
Okay, great. And then also, like, essentializing things, like, I don't think you understand that, like, in the creation of the white identity, like, that was created as a racist structure. People who profit off of,
what a shocker. Everyone knows that.
Again, like I already said, the white identity was created because it didn't used to exist. It was created in the early 1600s to justify colonization and slavery, and then continued to hoard resources from people who were enslaved and colonized, or anyone who wasn't considered white. So there's a way where white people are still profiting off of this racist structure. So when I'm saying that, I'm not actually being racist. I'm talking about history here.
Okay, so no, you're not. The fact that historical racism leads to continued socioeconomic benefits for white people, that statement does not necessarily follow into, I think it's okay to morally impugn an entire race of people because they disproportionately do this thing that I don't like.
It shouldn't, but for her it does because...
that's not what I'm talking
it's biased
about.
Okay, wait, please, we're going in circles. Look,
specifically colonial. I'm not saying like, I just don't like them. They do things I don't like, so let's just get rid of them. I'm talking about.
No, that's exactly what you're saying.
Okay,
being able to get rid of people who colonize them.
Okay, I don't know if we're going to find any more agreement on this particular subject. The only thing that I guess bugs me at the end of this
How did you get up here?
I think that not only is your logic almost identical to a lot of white nationalists that I've talked to, you're actually more masked off than they're willing to be.
Yep.
Like, you have receded now.
I'm masked off because I am talking about racism here.
Well,
and
so are they.
So you seem to think that when people talk about colonialism and say that, hey, we need to let the people who have been colonized figure out what to do about the people who have colonized them and be able to live without being colonized. You think that's the same thing as white nationalism.
No.
You're doing it right now. You can't concede that there's more nuance here than just it being white nationalism.
So if it leads to
He's not saying that.
racial essentialism that then leads to the creation of an ethnostate, then yeah, I would say that's essentially white nationalism, except obviously it's not for white people. I mean, the term black nationalism,
justification is pretty much the same. It follows the same logic.
The issue that I have is when I talk to white nationalists, they hide their intentions a lot better than you seem to have. They're usually
I'm not, I don't have anything to hide.
Please.
I don't have
Clearly.
anything to hide.
they're talking points in metaphor and dog whistle. You know, usually they talk about how they don't have a problem with any of the races. They don't think anyone is worse or better than the others. They just think that we have different cultures. But your obsequious insistence on racial essentialization for thee but not for me is really, I mean, God, I just want to ask, do you think it's possible that you may have internalized some of the logic of racism, but you might be just reversing it a little bit?
Do you think it's possible that you might actually be misunderstanding what I'm saying? Because I'm saying that white people still benefit off of a structure, and that's a problem.
I agree with that.
We already know
don't
this.
think that means you can just racially
deal with.
Yeah, but you can deal with it without racially essentializing white people. It's okay to attack the structure, not races of people.
Really?
So I think for a lot of countries, attacking the structure of colonialism means dealing with the white people who have colonized it.
Does that make it okay?
The problem is, this is also what modern Nazis say about Jews in America. Did you know that a lot of our political structure
wait, hold on. Is that unfair to say?
Did you know
that unfair to say that the white people who have colonized those countries need to be decolonized?
Okay, hold on.
Is that so wild to say?
You're just being so simple about it. Just what does decolonization really mean, and who are the colonizers?
Nazis will say, is it so ridiculous?
You are so unwilling to define both of those things.
Which, by the way, is real. There are a lot of them there for complicated reasons, but you don't seem to care.
Why are they doing that?
Hold on.
They're doing that because they have an ignorant racism towards Jewish people. Why are colonized people trying to figure out how to decolonize themselves?
You need to hold on. So while Jewish people in America are certainly an oppressed minority in many, many respects, there are elements of disproportionate control we enjoy. So looking at that, Nazis will say, well, is it so wrong for us to want to free ourselves from the colonizing influence of this ethnic group with an oppressive and a colonial set of intentions for our people? This is the logic they all use, and it all stems, all of it, 100% from what you're doing and I don't. The essentialization of a racial group.
Because you're saying that, like, white people or white
I am not asking you to be anti. I am not asking you to be pro-colonization. I'm asking you to not essentialize racial groups.
Be anti-colonization. Don't be anti-white. It's not that hard.
I am telling you.
Why do we have to essentialize this? They're not the same thing.
Would be colonized African countries.
Your sociological analysis would be better if you stopped essentializing socioeconomic problems to racial groups, because that is the logic every group that we hate does.
Colonizers are white. So you'd prefer it if I said that we need to deal with the white people who are colonizing them, but not all white people are colonizers. So that's
oh my God.
Talk about dealing with colonization, because it's not just white people who benefit from it either. There are black people in South Africa who benefit from colonization. There are Native Americans here today in America that benefit from their oppression.
Benefiting from colonialism. That structure was literally created to benefit the white people who are colonizing it. It's not out of character. It's not a misrepresentation to say that this is an issue of white people colonizing people. And I can't believe that this whole debate was about that. What the fuck?
So again,
what the fuck, Vaush? Like,
do you think I'm gonna try this?
That's the point that you're harping on.
I'm gonna try this
so
one more
childish.
time.
Why have you been talking for like an hour?
I'm gonna try this one more time. Do you think crime in America is a black problem?
Maybe you should try something else.
Yeah, you really should just try something else. She's not gonna engage with it at all. She hasn't all this time. Why even still trying now?
I already think that your point is irrelevant right here. So if you want to try to make it clearer, or if you want to use a different example, I'll listen to that.
Okay,
but again, historically, colonization is done by white people, and historically, to this day, they're still benefiting off of it. So it's not wrong for me to say that colonization is an issue of white people benefiting off of colonial structures.
So I'll just end with this, I guess, because I don't know how much farther we're capable of going. Your sociological analysis would get you laughed out of any undergraduate degree, and I can say that with the absolute confidence of a person who didn't get laughed out of my classes. Your analysis is so vanishingly shallow that it leaves out any of the nuances that allow us to meaningfully critique these systems. The fact that not all white people participated in colonization willingly, or knew what they were doing, or that people born to those people aren't the same as people who initially engaged in it, or that they were doing it for benefit of power structures that they were victims of, or any of a million other things. These are all nuances that your desire to essentialize white people completely destroy. I think that you probably are a bit racist, and I think it's a bad look.
Yeah.
I think you would be a much better anti-colonialist if you address those problems, because this is genuinely bad.
Honestly.
Wait, did you mute yourself, or are you talking to your own audience? Well, I guess that's about as clean of a finisher as we're getting to this one, huh? Wait, I didn't mute her. I didn't touch anything. I didn't mute. I know I get accused of... Wait, why... Don't you raise your hands. What do you... I didn't mute. What do you mean? Can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me, but I can't. Okay.
Please be no lava. Please. Okay.
Would you, like me to call again? Okay, I'll just do that then.
That's hilarious. What a hilarious moment that was.
Are we alive?
Can you hear?
Oh my god. Okay, hello. Alright.
Hi.
Somebody pressed something. I didn't have my hand on the mouse. I get accused of...
I don't know what happens.
Okay, look,
Whatever.
can we just be anti-colonialist without the fucking crazy racial essentialism, if at all possible?
It's not,
Please?
I just don't think it's crazy to say that there's an issue of colonialism with white people.
Oh my god.
Okay, do you think there's an issue of crime with black people?
Why?
Stop with that, Vaush, please. She will not engage with that.
With black people, in the sense that black people have been put in really shitty situations because of racism. It's like, I can understand that, like, the white people who have colonized people, it happened because they came from places where kings and queens were trying to, you know, profit off of colonialism, and that those people are kind of just puppets in that instance. And at the
You
same time,
finally
those
get
white
it.
people, those very white people are still benefiting off of colonialism, and that's continued to
But we
this
can
day,
deal
and
with
that's
that,
still a
not
problem.
I feel like your
like
moral philosophy
antagonize white people for it. It's not like it's their fault that they're benefiting from it.
Roll back to sociological explanations until white people are at fault, you know? What if,
That's
what if
really
we
not
talked
what
about...
it is. That's misrepresentation thing. I'm talking about colonialism. And I think what colonialism is horrible. It's like literally taking the power away from people. It's taking their land away. It's destroying their culture. It's trying to make them assimilate into a whiter culture. And that's a problem. Colonialism is horrible. It destroys like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Why is colonialism
history.
just a white
It's
thing?
kind of a big deal. And so what I'm saying is that people who are colonized need to figure out how to have their own self-determination
Okay,
again, because that's been taken
none
away.
of this has
and it looks
anything to do with
different for
racial
different countries.
essentialization. Okay, I know. You can keep running back to the colonization bad thing. It just doesn't mean much, because I completely agree with you and have never disagreed with that point. I'm saying you're a
Oh,
worse
you're just mad because I'm
anti-colonialist.
saying that white people are colonists, and you want me to say that like the white people who are colonists are
No,
colonists.
I'm just
Is
okay.
that
Well,
what's going on?
no, it's fine. You can phrase this as like I don't know, Whitey upset that he learns white people did bad things or whatever. I just think that
He
your analysis
learns.
is really shallow, and it's hurting your ability to understand these.
Whitey has learned.
Well, I could say the same for you.
But my
Maybe you should actually look into
argument is we
Kenya
shouldn't
a little bit more.
essentialize. That's
Or maybe Tanzania. What am I essentializing though? What am I essentializing when I say that colonialism is an issue of white people colonizing things? This isn't to say that other people can't colonize people. I mean, there's been a
You really
colonization
are
from
implying
all
that,
sorts of
though.
people, but I think when you're looking at the global stage of the main issues of colonialism that we're dealing with today, so much of it is from Europeans. in this
and
modern
hey,
time.
you know, there are other bad things that are disproportionately done by other racial groups too. But thankfully, I like to look underneath the hood and think about the broader
Yeah, I'm
socioeconomic
not
issue.
saying that there's not.
rather
I just don't
than-
understand why you're upset
Hold
at me
on,
for
wait.
saying
My
that,
cat is
like,
mad. Hold on, my cat is the actual upset. Hey, Jen. Go. Be free. Go. All right, we freed the. Okay, yeah, So how many brownie points did we get?
You got one because earlier you were talking about how in a different video you were saying that you platformed a creator 1/30th of your size. So you got a brownie point for that.
Do you feel platformed right now?
Not much else, sadly.
Dang, you really do be like that, bro.
I guess we'll both fight colonialism in our own ways, you know?
One will be more effective than the other, and one is less retarded than the other.
Right, well,
but you'll keep on fighting in your own ways, I guess.
Shout yourself
out? Not really. There were some things that you said in the last video. Can I ask about, or are you just ready to move on?
Oh no, you can hit it up. Yeah, okay, yeah, let's run it through.
Okay, so I guess we're moving on from that point. There's just like a few things in my video that you had said, or when you were reacting to the last one. One thing that you said was that it was like Weasley that I defined listening as understanding. I don't understand why you thought that was Weasley because I said this in my first video, but you had skipped that part. Yeah, I just don't really know why that's Weasley.
I think I don't remember the specific context, but I think a lot of people say like listen to X group, and what they actually mean is automatically agree with X
Quartz.
God knows that's
I made sure to make that distinction in like the first video, and then you skipped it. So it's like, yeah,
well,
that's not what I was saying.
It's a good video. I apologize for missing that part.
Okay. The next thing is, so I didn't say that all ridicule black people. Oh yeah. So another thing is that you say that all ridiculing of black people is racist, and I made sure to say that a lot of times white people ridicule black people, it is racist. But I didn't say that like you can't just ever like make a joke about black people. I think it probably is racist, but I'm sure there's exceptions, and that's why I make sure to use the words usually.
Oh, I like to make fun of both races. I don't really care.
Like
I think it's fine to me. Maybe I'm just
like you were
edgy or something, but I really don't care.
For the most part, like pretty much any ridiculing that you would do of a black person would be racist. I don't know.
I think I said usually, because I think a lot of times when white people ridicule black people, it usually is racist, but I'm sure there's some sort of exception. I can't really think of one.
There can be exceptions. I think there should be some exceptions.
I definitely did.
Yeah, I mean,
as long as it's not done in like the heart of it is like hateful or something like that, you know.
Would be racist. I don't know. I feel like the boundary is drawn somewhat arbitrarily. Lord knows I've been called racist for saying things that I do not think are racist. So the cancel culture mob is run amok, etc.
Blah blah blah.
Okay. And one of the last things I want to talk about.
I'm shocked there was no more lava.
Pearl clutching, because I said that you're making this place hostile for a number of black people, and yeah, I just really wanted to say, fuck you, you are.
Out of curiosity, how much harassment have you gotten from my community?
I've got a lot of comments. I don't really know how to quantify that.
It's just I often
for it to be upsetting.
I often get accused of like having a really bad community and that like I send people to harass, but I honestly feel like, I mean, I have a huge community. If I wanted to, I could bury a smaller channel, but it's never happened. I feel like my community is generally pretty good, you know? I don't know if I make this like hostile to anyone, really.
Maybe you're being up your own ass about it, but
even people who I openly strongly dislike
probably.
Thoughts,
I don't know enough about your community to say that you're telling the truth or not.
You know?
Honestly, I don't even think you know enough about your community to say that or not, Vaush.
I guess I'd need to see how much. It's inevitable
Maybe.
that there's going to be some kind of backwash to that, but
it's like whenever this stuff happens, there's like a wave of your fans and audience just like shitting on people. It's like whenever someone disagrees with you,
I think that's
there's, like,
everybody's
all these people who are,
fan
like,
base.
really angry and accusing you of things that aren't really happening.
Is it harassment or is it criticism though? Because usually when I see people like the screenshots come out of my community, it's like, I think this is a bad video. Vaush good.
Vaush good.
Well, it may be annoying. I don't necessarily know if that's shitting on you. That just seems like the sort of thing that YouTubers do. When you say like making it intolerable for black people,
it's about that bias, bro.
Content creators, I feel like the implication is that like anytime a black person disagrees with me, their whole channel gets swamped with racism or something, which definitely doesn't happen.
I mean, like, just the
Shouldn't.
examples that I've given, like,
Your community is
example,
one of the
like,
most
St. Andrew,
anti-racist
really
communities out there.
It's a racist, like, because this person,
Know that at least.
you know, it's about No Name's tweet where No Name's like, this content is a few, and St. Andrew tries to talk about that. You, in that conversation, like, you accuse St. Andrew of starting a race war, of being a segregationist, of being anti-black, of being pro-white, and then your audience sees that, and they're like, oh yeah, fuck this person. People are gonna watch this video of me talking with you, and they're like, oh yeah, fuck this person. This person's basically a separatist who wants to have mass genocide. Like, that's their takeaway. My point is that when you have this audience of people, it doesn't actually end up representing.
I'll say that and be correct.
Saying. And so anyone
at the very least,
because they're just comparing them to white nationalists really willy-nilly, is making things very toxic for a number of black people who disagree with you.
But I stand
it's gonna be fucked up for me.
Well, then maybe, I don't know, like, that's kind of on them if they have opinions so odious that it leads to, like, people getting mad at them. I don't know. Like, does that mean that, like, if black people have, like, bad opinions, I can't disagree with them because that's me harassing them for their opinions? I don't know how to handle that.
I don't think that's like bad opinion. Like, you just literally can't help but compare these things to white nationalism.
I think it's a salient problem.
Nah,
I think it's a salient criticism.
They're kind of like a little
it's not like I just go after like black people.
Synonymous.
Most of the people I argue with are white, of course, because I mostly argue with American conservatives. I don't think it's like me making the space.
You justify your horrible opinions the same way white nationalists do.
Because I'm a larger platform, so any disagreement that comes from my direction is going to be felt disproportionately. But I can't just not criticize people.
But it's like literally when I talk about black people having their own self-determination.
Okay,
you compared me to Hitler.
That is
explicitly
did you say that?
Line that white nationalists use, so that doesn't differentiate.
I don't think he said.
Right.
Did he mention Hitler?
Genocide, like,
I really don't remember Vaush even mentioning Hitler at all. Period.
Get rid of colonialism.
Maybe I'm just being stupid.
Have that conversation and figure out what that is and look different for every place. You can't have that conversation without comparing me to Hitler.
No,
you know what I'm saying? You literally called St. Andrew, accused him of having a race war. You accused No Name of being a segregationist because all she said was this tweet isn't for white people. You know what I'm saying? Like, those are such extremes.
I do disagree with the language of her tweet. I don't remember the stuff with St. Andrew.
You can disagree without comparing these people to white nationalists. That's what I'm saying.
What if I
because
think
black
like
people are talking about this stuff.
I don't have a problem with talking about it. Your video
Maybe if you
and this discussion fears that you believe in things that I think are horrendously unethical. I think my criticisms here are salient. I don't think these are spurious.
They're sound criticisms, but unfortunately, you as a white person will get slammed for making these criticisms and these comparisons, no matter how true they are.
Was he the guy who went off on that? And then there was that other one. Was it Tariq Nasheed? There were some patterns that I noticed where people, black people, would express pro-black talking points with language that mirrored the rhetoric and the logic of white nationalists. And I saw people agreeing with them. And then I saw some other people kind of not agreeing, but maybe kind of defending them a little bit, you know?
Sure. And, like, you can disagree with that, but you just maybe need to, like, understand what these things are before, like, making a video about it.
But I think I do. The video
I know
that you
you
saw,
think you do. Like, we're just talking about, like, colonialism, and, like, even when I'm talking about, like, people, like, having the autonomy to get rid of colonialism, like, there's all these different situations of what that looks like, and then your point is that I'm like Hitler. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a huge leap.
I don't think that's
it's not,
summary.
but I think you need to actually understand about like what colonial looks like. Like, learn about.
I really don't remember him mentioning Hitler or comparing her to Hitler.
But
I'm misgendering much.
I've agreed with that the entire time.
But this whole time you tried to paint me as someone who's cool with genocide.
No, you painted yourself as somebody who's cool with genocide. You had a hard time even taking that off the table when he asked several times.
One of them is that you said that oppressed peoples have a moral right, if they choose to excise people of different races if those were colonizers. That is a form of genocide. You said that explicitly. You can't back out of that. And secondly, you continue to essentialize socioeconomic trends to white people if they're the ones disproportionately committing it, which I think hinders your analysis. Those are two things you do, and I think that a lot of white nationalists do exactly those two things as well. In fact, that logic, those are like the two foundations of ethno-state creation. So that's the problem that I have, you know? And I don't think that's a spurious comparison. I think that it's fair. I wish that you would, at the very least, understand why I believe that, as opposed to strawmanning me and framing me as someone who's so wildly ignorant and, like, triggered by the sight of black people that I just freak out and start making, like, random accusations. I don't think
Blacks.
it's descriptive of this.
Yeah, blacks.
Okay, but
I hate them.
the first
You know,
part, it's like I think like
typical
mass just like
Vaush.
killing people,
Getting triggered at
like
blacks.
having a literal genocide. I'm like, yeah, that would be messed up. But then me just saying like there might have to be a time where people get rid of the people who are colonized. Like that's not the same. It's just like having like a mass genocide.
Well,
Like-
you know, getting rid of is a very wide term that can be applied in a number of
for
ways.
example,
Yep.
Like again, I
Which
give
is
the
why
example
we
of
have to
Kenya,
take
who are
genocide
able
off the
to
table,
get rid
friend.
of the
But I
colonizers by-
explicitly asked you about the mass deportation of the 6 million white people in South Africa, and you said that it was the right of black South Africans to do that. You're saying that they have a right to commit a genocide. That's a pro-genocide stance, as far as I'm concerned.
I think they have the right to at least figure out if they want the colonizers to be there or not, and like how to do that process. But yeah,
Well, I mean, I really, I take issue with the idea that me being opposed
What?
to
I hate this mouse so much.
ethnostates means that I'm like toxic towards black content
but it's
creators.
not just like you being oppressed to ethnostates, because I think for me, like even if like people got rid of like the white South Africans in South Africa, I think there's like ways that could happen that would be really messed up. But I do think it's for the black South Africans to figure out like how to do that in general. I guess I will say that there are some lines that definitely can be crossed, but that's not even just what I'm saying. Like what I'm
Yeah,
saying
what are
is that,
those
like, people who
lines?
just disagree
Define
with
those
you,
lines that could be
people
crossed that
can't
you would
help
not be
compare
okay
them to white
with.
nationalists.
Well,
And that's a huge thing
Only
that
if
I
they
take.
sound like white nationalists. I disagree with lots of people who I don't call white nationalists. I try to.
But like you were saying that No Name is a segregationist just because No Name said that this tweet isn't for white people.
But I have defended the language that I've used, but I do not think that means that this is just something I throw at all black people. I've explained
Nope.
the logic behind why I've said what I've said. You can think that it's hyperbolic if you want, but I think that the
And it
logic
is.
consistent and follows a strong through line. I stand by it. It does scare me a little bit when I see stuff like this from people who purport to be on the left, because it makes me worry sometimes that the conservative stereotype of anti-racism is alive in some people, that some people are driven principally by resentment, not a
Yep.
desire to make things equal, but rather a desire to take out the historical pain of oppression.
White people
on
will
the
point at
oppressed
people
group. And I see
like
that
Professor
in the way you
Flowers
insist on essentializing
and
problems to
assume
white
that
people, because I
literally
don't
the
see any
movement
reason to do
against
that
systemic
besides
racism
emotional.
is
It
just
seems
like that.
like a whole
And it just
otherwise
diminishes
consistent
everything we're trying to do.
that
It's
is driven
disgusting.
by resentment. And that
Like when you're
makes me worry.
saying when you're saying that I'm like essentializing all problems to white people, what I'm saying is that white people profit off of colonialism, and that's like not an untrue statement. And I'm saying that issue needs to be dealt with. I'm not saying that like every white person like wants, even actively wants to colonize people. I'm just saying that there is an issue where white people are still profiting
You
off.
said the
That's
white
why I even
people
gave the example.
in South
That's why I
Africa
gave the
were
example of my
colonizers.
dad, who
Yep.
is still be able to profit off of racism as a white person.
Yeah, somebody in my chat makes a good point. I mean, you also profit off colonialism. You are American.
Yes.
Yes,
I hate
I'm
to say it,
American,
but we
I still
actually
have to
kinda
fight
do.
racism. Like, there's ways you can profit off of it, but I find racism
but that's
and
a-
colonialism to be
what a-
extremely oppressive.
Well, you can't be like, oh, it's okay for me to be a colonizer if I'm also a victim of racism, can you? If you want to like go out and be
No, this is why I'm saying like indigenous people, like in my opinion, I think that they should like decide what to do with their own land, and I don't think that's just in regards.
What does that
to
mean,
white
decide
people.
what to do with their
I
own
don't think
land?
they would,
yeah, what white
take
South
literally all of their
Africans,
land
What's good,
back,
Skeleton?
but-
white South Africans are victims of classism, and the female white South Africans are victims of sexism, and the trans white South Africans are victims of transphobia. So maybe it's okay for them to be colonizers in South Africa as well because they have another intersectional axis to protect them from the consequences.
Exactly. There's so much nuance to these problems.
That's up to South Africans to figure out what to do.
Oh
with
my
people who
God.
colonize them.
Maybe they should figure out what to do with you.
Colonize themselves.
Because you're a colonizer too, right?
You really keep dodging these questions.
I think indigenous people definitely have the right to figure out what to do with
No, the whole third world. After all, we're all participating in the colonization of the developing world, right?
Yep.
Maybe like the 2 or 3 billion people that we get all of our material resources from should get to decide what to do with the rest of us, since our colonization doesn't just end at the border, does it? It's not like you can only be a colonizer if you're physically in the land that's being colonized, right? You and I both economically benefit tremendously from America's exploitation of the rest of the world.
Yeah, I don't understand why that'd also be bad for like the people who are exploited to figure out what to do about their exploitation from us. Like if people were like, I don't want to, like let's try to create an economic system where we don't have to be exploited by America. Like I don't understand why that would be an issue.
What if they want Westerners to leave the planet because we've engaged in too much global colonization?
Well, I think that issue is different because they're being exploited by us, but we're not actually like
my lord,
in the sense where we're like
even this ridiculous hypothetical you're willing to like,
well, we're pushing,
oh my God,
colonization
with sweatshops and factories, and we're doing it through an economic
so I think,
system
like,
we benefit from.
Their autonomy and like
I can't believe she's willing to be charitable with this
colonial structures
rather
here.
ridiculous hypothetical.
All these structures that like feed money back to America while we make nothing. I think in that situation, like they should have the right to determine that.
Shouldn't they have a right to determine whether or not to share the planet with their colonizers? I mean, should they just... So even if they take back their country, the people in these colonized countries just have to live with the permanent indignity and economic inequality of living on a planet that has countries like America and England as well?
No, I don't understand what you're getting at.
Well, I mean, our presence here continues to take away from them. The carbons that we belch out into the air, the resources that we take from the rest of the world, our presence in geopolitical weight. It seems like the most ethical way to handle all of this is to find the single most oppressed person on earth, like a disabled trans woman somewhere in Bangladesh, and ask them if they want to nuke the rest of the planet. It just seems to me like your logic is fundamentally about retaliation.
Strange slippery slope fallacy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm saying that colonized people should have the autonomy to decolonize themselves. And you're saying that we should find the most oppressed person in the world. And
again, what does that mean? Like, what does decolonization mean, and who are the colonizers?
I mean, you're saying that oppressed people have a right to excise millions of people from their country. But borders are arbitrary. We all live on a planet, don't we? I mean, does it have to stop at the border? Why should national inheritance be the limit of the retribution the oppressed have the right to inflict upon their historical oppressors?
I'm not talking about retribution. I'm talking about how to get rid of a colonial problem, and that's really different.
Would America stop being a colonial problem if our businesses just got out of those countries? No, we'd still be a huge problem, wouldn't we? It seems like we pose an existential threat to the oppressed, colonized people of the world. One which they would perhaps have almost unlimited legitimacy in ridding themselves of.
I think that there is a lot to be said for the power dynamics in other countries. Like, I don't really think one country should have enough power to determine how the rest of the world lives. So I think dismantling that power is really important.
How do you dismantle that power? I don't think that means,
like... I think, like, you could try to perhaps, like, push for socialism. Like, if every country was socialism, I think that would lead to a more equitable outlook of things. But
cool. I guess.
The power
not really sure how I feel about the entirety of socialism just yet.
There's so many issues. I don't even know where to begin to answer that question. The question of imperialism.
But what if they felt the only way to really do it was with unrequited nuclear warfare?
Yeah.
You make an argument
what then?
For that. The damage that would be done to the planet through nuclear winter would at least temporarily counteract some of the climate change.
I think we already went over this. Like, I'm not saying that there should be mass genocide. I'm just saying that
exactly, but you don't know what other people are going to say. Why are you just giving them the full power to say what they want to do or what not to do? You have no idea what they're going to advocate for.
Planet?
There's some things you just have to take off the table. Have to.
Like, if people who are colonized are like, I don't want to live with the people who have colonized me, then I think they need to figure out how to remove people who colonize them if they want to.
But America colonized the world, so shouldn't the logic extend transnationally?
Oh God.
I think the people who have been colonized should be able to just decide if they want to get rid of people who have colonized them. And I think to the extent where they have their own autonomy. Again.
It just goes in circles,
I
bro.
think that's what this all comes down to. Like, people need to have their own autonomy and self-determination, and people don't. And so, like, that's really, like, I guess the extent of what I'm saying.
No, I agree with that. I'm just saying that in the modern economic age, we aren't we don't do colonization by sending boats
drip skeleton.
To, to colonize lands or anything like that. We do it through a complicated,
wrong.
Trade and
all right,
power.
I'm ready.
So, with all of that, it seems like there's no way to actually remove the colonizer. You said before that war could be justified if there were no alternatives. If you couldn't remove Americans from the planet, I mean, do you think that
you don't need to remove Americans from the planet, though, in order to get rid of their economic power over countries?
Well, what if the oppressed people?
Like a number of ways. Like, what if there were like laws put in place where it's like this level of exploitation can't happen for starters?
What if the oppressed
there's like
people?
Ways where like African countries are like heavily exploited, where like they can't. They're like in huge debt, where like the inflation of the debt's too high for them to be able to pay it back, and there's like no laws protecting them really, so they're just gonna forever stay in debt. It's like you could try to like make laws to get rid of the amount of debt that they had. For example, that's just like one example off the top of my head.
No, I get
people
that.
Who are or like exploiting people's labor, we could just there could be like laws where it's like you can't like you have to have like these level of working conditions and you can't exploit labor in these ways. Like I don't understand. Like,
that's cool.
I feel like you're trying to make a slippery slope of like
no. I'm not trying to make a slippery slope.
You can't get rid of.
I'm just testing.
Wow, the meme.
I'm testing.
Oh God, the meme.
Logic. So my question, this is the last one then, is
I just lived the meme.
If the third world decided they could do that, but it probably wouldn't work. The only way to truly succeed would be global conquest through military or nuclear arms. Do you think that would be defensible as a sort of final way of eliminating the colonization?
Can you say that again?
If the third world, the oppressed peoples of the world, realized that nothing would really work except for like planetary conquest through nukes or through invasion, that the only way to free themselves from colonization would be to simply encompass the world in their own power. Do you think that would be a defensible thing to do, or do you think they should simply wallow in their global imperialism, unable to strike back?
Let's see.
Let's see, Professor Flowers.
Because I keep on losing your train of thought. So you're saying that if third world people had the right to nuke people or wallow, or the other decision is to wallow in their like colonized place?
If they felt there was no way to address global colonialism without some kind of radical military or nuclear solution to the rest of the world.
What would you say to them?
Well, I think that I just think I don't really see that happening because it's like there's like an impractical.
How do you know that?
What if they could? You know?
If they could, I think that
it's not impossible for them to think something like that.
Like nuking entire countries, like kind of affects the rest of the world. It's killing a lot of people.
Some people are just that vengeful, man.
I don't really think that addresses like the issue of colonialism. It's just like obliterating people. And I think what I'm saying is like, insofar as the addressing of colonialism, people should have the right to deal with that. And that's really all I'm saying.
But not through like nuclear retaliation.
God, that is terrifying.
I think nuclear retaliation wouldn't be a good idea, because there's just wipes out like entire places. It kills like entire populations.
But if it worked,
not everybody will think rationally like that.
Effective way of ending the global colonization.
What scenario would it be like an effective way of ending?
I can't believe you're engaging with this and not even just calling it out for its ridiculousness.
We wouldn't be able to colonize.
It's really telling for Professor Flowers' character, to be honest with you.
Okay, I think maybe what you're saying is that I think you're maybe thinking that I'm saying that.
Oh my God! It's like you're considering it.
Do whatever they want, even if it means nuking people. I think I'm saying
I think deporting
like
white
ending
people.
colonization.
I think deporting white people from South Africa is the nuclear option. There are 6 million whites in South
Jesus, that is a lot of zombies.
which is significantly more people than the number that we killed in
God.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It seems to me like if we're willing to accept that you should act against colonialism up to a point, but past a certain point, the ethics of it grow worse than than whatever benefits you could accrue through decolonization, then I would say, following that assumption, you could never argue ethically for an ethno-state. That it would always be an unjustifiable extreme. That there are always ways to address colonization without going as far as excluding an entire racial group.
I don't truly think so. Like, there are people, like, I don't understand, like, why you couldn't have, like,
there has to be a spawner, right?
Space where it's like black people live there, and
what the?
like,
Oh
the only
God!
is to stay away from people who oppressed us. Like, I don't understand. Like, there are places that already have most black people, and I don't know why you can't just be like, okay, this is going to be like a black area that's like a safe haven for black people. But I do think I will like say that like I guess
that's an ethno.
I don't think.
This is what I mean about you being less respond than white nationalists. They're usually not willing to just
like I said in my video, there's a difference between people who are like, I want to be in my own state because I'm oppressed by people, versus people who are like, well, these people are inferior and need to be ruled over by people. Like, I think there are people who want, I think there are separatists who are really bad people who are they're sexist and homophobic and anti-Semitic, and then I think there's people who just want to get away from people who are oppressed.
I think what you're saying is worse than any of those things. I think a person who says ethno-states are okay is on a much worse level than your average anti-Semite, sexist, racist, transphobe, whatever. Ethno-states are the most destructive creation that has ever been born of man. More harm has been created as a product of ethno-states.
I might die here.
Ever existed. What the people who construct them, the rest of the oppressor, white or black, whatever. This is like these are like absolute evil of the human organization. And the idea that black people's lives are going to be better. I mean, you can argue
why?
This. No part of America.
Where did they
go?
Jesus.
Move to Africa, where no country is better in total than America is in terms of socioeconomic achievement. Probably not. So what are we talking about then? Wouldn't it not, I don't know, are black people in Africa safe? It seems like they're not, because they die more than black people do over here. I don't think that you make yourself safe by removing yourself from other racial groups. It seems like what makes you safe is a bunch of socioeconomic stuff that doesn't get fixed with ethno-states.
I mean, people who want to be away from their oppressors, I don't understand, like, why that sentiment in itself is bad. Like, why do black people have to integrate with white people? Like, if black people don't want to do that because they're tired of dealing with oppression,
this is what and white nationalists say.
And they do that in a way that's not hurting people, like, why is that bad?
But ethno-states always hurt people every time. We could
always.
We can talk about mixed-raced people. What if a person who's black in a black ethno-state falls in love with a white person? Can they raise mixed children in a black ethno-state? Do they have to leave? Are they excised? Can their child leave? Or is their child going to be taken?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask. Don't dodge this.
1/8 black? Do the police come? Do they show up? Is miscegenation banned in these areas? To what extent are cultural affects banned? Is white TV allowed in a black ethno-state? Because ethno-states tend to be pretty protective of the perceived culture of a racial group. What happens to people of different cultures who come in there? What if there are black people who disagree with the
They won't be coming in there, probably.
That were created?
Wrong direction.
Americans and black Africans are nothing alike because one of them are Americans and the other Africans. Black Africans aren't like black Africans.
Still down here.
Ethno-states are fundamentally destructive. And all of this because what? We want to avoid microaggressions from white people? If you're talking about
picked up my armor.
Racism, then you're not going to escape that by leaving the country. Trust me, American white supremacy is global. So you're not saving yourself from that. The only thing you're saving from is the rigmarole of watching white people fail to jump and dance poorly. And what, be interpersonally rude? Is that like worth the ethno-state? Systemic racism will carry across the border of the ethno-state. We're really just talking about microaggressions and the occasional hate crime, which are really bad, but again, an ethno-state? I mean, that just seems like such an incredible, wild direction to go in. What if white people?
I mean, I think it is a very incredible, wild direction to go in. But I think my point is that I can understand white people are so fed up with racism that they don't want to be around white people. And I think that I think that people who are saying that their pain needs to be understood instead of just calling them a white nationalist.
Give me this.
Like, I think you need to understand why there are people who are so frustrated with racism that they want to go to a place where they can get away from that. It's like what an ethno-state would actually look like. I don't know. I guess in my opinion,
it would
does
be
sound
bad.
really shitty. Like, I don't want to just like have to only force people to have to only date black people if they don't want to do that. But I think my point with that is that people who want to be away from their oppressors and like have that space.
Who is the oppressor?
And there's a way where people are trying to talk about that.
Why not just hang out with other black
they're painted
people?
as, I mean, people do that.
Yeah, but like,
and there's people like we're still like in a white supremacist country. It's like people want to live in a place.
And what are we gonna do about that?
Place ruled by white supremacism, and I can understand that, and that's my point about that. Like, I don't think
our domination
and
is
that's my
global.
point about that. I really
like you can't. I'm sorry, you can't escape whitey, man. You know this because we've been talking about it for 2 hours. You can make a black ethnicity all you want, but your economy is going to be buckled under the knee of America, which will, by the way, be an all-white America now, apparently, or at the very least majority white. That's not going to make us any less racist.
Just because somebody like made a portion of land black ethno-state doesn't mean that like all of America would be white, and that's not even
It'd
what
be
I'm
more white.
advocating for.
There'd be proportionally more white people than there are now, and we know how groups of people
I don't even know if black people would go for that. Like, I think there's a very like I think the
how do you know
that about who do want like their own black ethno-state are like a very small percentage of people. Like, even when you like look at people have decolonized the countries, like they just want the colonizers to not have power and to like mostly leave and like, be able to have control over their own country. Like, all the examples that you've talked about in this debate are like the most extreme examples that like probably aren't going to happen.
Yeah, well, and that's why it sucks when I see it online. I get called anti.
Why?
Well, the thing is like there are so many things like that's just not what people are saying. Like, people are saying like I want my own space with black people, calling them segregationists. People are saying that like
there has to be a spawner.
I can understand like why there's people who don't want to live with their oppressors, and then all of a sudden like you're comparing them to Hitler. And what I'm saying is that these conversations like need to have more nuance than just comparing people to white nationalists and black nationalists. Like, the fact that we spent this whole conversation talking about how like I'm like Hitler and talking about how like no matter what these ideas are going to be like white nationalism.
The ideas
I just don't
you're
think
sharing
it's very nuanced and like able to look at these issues that like black people are bringing up.
But the nuance that you're bringing up is, yeah, it's basically the same, except we're oppressed, so it's okay when we do it. That's basically been like the nuance that you keep touching on. These are the same arguments.
Bro.
Well, and I've
you
talked
gotta
to so
die.
many white nationalists, so I speak
like, I think
with great confidence when I say that, you know?
Like, I will agree that like, okay, like mass genocide, that's fucked up. Mass deportation, I think, depending on how like people are thinking of like deporting people who colonized them, I'm not really sure what that would look like. I definitely think that can be a line that's crossed. But ultimately, what I'm just trying to say is that people who are colonized need to be able to get rid of the people who have colonized them, to be able to have their own power.
Good God.
And that looks very different.
You can talk about that, but when you talk mass deportation, then it turns out all the countries bordering yours don't want to accept millions of refugees, and you start having conversations about where you're going to put all these people that you have lined at the border. You build camps to hold them and train yards to make sure supplies can be reached from those places. And eventually, it's not like this only happened in Germany, you know. The mass, like, state execution of populations is not, like, exclusively a white people thing.
I think I'm agreeing with you there, actually. Like, I think I'm saying that, like, yeah, okay, mass deportation actually sounds pretty shitty. But there are a number of examples where people have gotten rid of people who have colonized them, and it wasn't that. And, like, I don't even know if there's an example of that, because I don't think colonized people want to do that. Colonized people just want to have their own autonomy again. And what I'm saying is that when people talk about having their own autonomy, that the immediate example that it goes to is that they're white nationalists. And like that's my issue is like people can't talk about this stuff. Like what does it look like to colonize their country without looking like white nationalism?
If the autonomy that you mean is autonomy from people of other races, then I will say that.
Where did torches go?
If the autonomy you mean is I think the people who live in this country should control this country, then that's fine. That's democracy. I'm not going to complain about that. And that's the language of anti-apartheid movements that took place back in South Africa as well, you know? As I understood it, Mandela wasn't going up there and talking about how they need to get all the whites out. They were talking about how they need to make the country equitable and the laws need to be even and fair and people who live here should have like control over their country and so on and so on. I think that's fine. I will never disagree with that. But sometimes the language of people's liberation and the language of racial separatism overlap. And then well, sometimes it trends in a more yikesy direction.
I mean, I can see that. Like, again, when I think of like the nationalists who are anti-Semitic, I'm like, yikes, that's really messed up, and you need to stop thinking that way.
What about when they're anti-white?
When people are anti-white, like I don't, again, like whiteness itself, like I've said, like the white racial identity is constructed specifically as a caste system.
So what about like white people?
So it's like when I say that I'm anti-white, like that's what I'm saying that I'm against. I think like white people as individuals, I've met I think people in general are really beautiful and incredible. And yeah, so
I have a hard time believing you think that.
Critical of what the white racial identity is, the history of it, and what it entails.
You'd say you know a few of the good ones.
Funny.
The good ones.
I think that like people are really incredible. I think no matter where you look, you're going to find incredible, beautiful people. And I think that white people have an issue of racism at the same time. Like, I don't think racism is about just being an entirely bad person. I think it's about being a part of this long history and being in the middle of that.
I was just wondering how you felt about black people who were racist against white people. Not whiteness.
Well, I think being anti-white, at least in the way that I'm describing, where it's being critical of the existence of like the white category of white people, how that was created as a caste system, I don't think that's racist. And I think a lot of times when people say they're anti-white, like that's what they're talking about. I don't really know.
Don't necessarily have a problem with that. Because, like, I just think the rhetoric can be a little hostile.
Like, inherently bad. Like,
you've
never
seen any
like
like white devil rhetoric or like black people whose critiques of white people extend a little bit beyond systemic and a little more interpersonal, that kind of stuff?
I mean, I've seen the white devil stuff. I think people, again, are still talking about, like, years of systemic racism. Like, I think when you get down to it and you, like, crack open, like, why are people saying this? It goes down to years of systemic racism, and that's what is being talked about. I think it's, like, unfair to be like, that's not it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, no, I just don't think that the context behind why a person is racist, like, makes it okay, really. But again, like, why are white people racist?
So you don't think it's okay for black people to be mad at white people for being racist because you think that's racist?
You can be mad at racists, and you could acknowledge that a lot of white people are racist, and you can critique whiteness.
Yes.
If you dislike white people because they're white, then I'd say that's pretty racist, you know?
It is.
I don't think people dislike white people because they're white. I think people dislike white people because so many white people have an issue with racism, and then when you find out that they don't, it's actually a surprise.
Would you say a lot of conservatives aren't racist? They just have a problem with black culture, but they know, like, they have some good black friends, so, like, it's not black people, it's like, you know...
It's essentially the same thing, unfortunately.
Trying to work with
that. No, I wouldn't say that.
Alright, I wouldn't either. I think it's kind of weird to judge members of a racial group based on characteristics you ascribe.
You think it's weird for black people to think that if you're white, you're probably going to have an issue with racism? Like, you think that's weird?
You can think that, but don't
whatever decision
like assume.
You want to make, by definition,
oh, Jesus.
Seeing of a person of a given race and judging them based on like conditions you associate with that group is racist.
Inherently.
Like if a person was walking through Detroit and saw a black guy and crossed the street because of it, you could argue there's a legitimate reason for that bias, but it's still racist. You know?
Right, but when white people have a racial bias against black people, it's coming from like years of dehumanizing black people. It's like racial stereotypes that were created where these white people don't actually know any black people. And when black people are criticizing white people for their racism, it comes from like knowing white people, having the experiences like after experience of racism from white people. It's a very different context, and that's kind of my point here. Is like the context of why
But it's
these
still
things are
bad.
being said is really different.
It's still
Why
bad
is it
regardless.
bad for a black person to not want to be around a white person because they think that they might be racist?
It's,
Like, why is that bad?
that's
Like,
the last part is why it's
does a
bad.
black
It's
person
because
hold that
they
white
think
person
they
their
might
time
be
to
racist.
determine
That
if
is
they're
bad.
racist or not?
Do you see how this logic could be used against a lot of other racial groups?
I think it can be used if you ignore the context of systemic racism.
But the
I think if
context
you
doesn't
pretend
change
that
the
systemic
reality.
racism,
But this is what I mean.
does.
You've done
The
this
context
whole,
matters. Like,
the whole convo. We've done this too.
the whole convo, I've been like, the context matters.
It's
That's
not
why
the context doesn't matter. The context doesn't excuse. So you keep saying stuff like, okay,
why does the context of systemic racism not excuse this? Why does that not excuse that there are black people who don't want to talk to white people because of racism?
Because
Why
you're
does that context
generalizing.
okay, fine.
It is
How about
inherently
this?
racist.
Do you think it's racist for a gay white person?
Answer the question. Why does it not matter?
The context
You
matters.
made me answer your questions, and then you told me that I don't understand and can't listen.
The
And then
context.
you inferred that I was like stupid or something. Yeah, said that I was laughed out of my college classes.
No,
And I'm
I
an
think
honor
you're-
student.
I think
You
you're-
answer my question. How about that?
I think you're racist, not stupid. I think that so the context is important when it comes to understanding these issues, but I don't think that makes it okay for an oppressed person to be racist. I can give you another example. Do you think
Why
it's
is
racist?
it racist when a black person has experienced racism time and time again from white people, and they're like, you know what? I just don't want to be around white people because I keep on
My
having this experience.
God. There is definitely a
What about white
spawner.
people
Is
who've
that
gotten
racist?
mugged by black people multiple times and don't want to have that experience?
What
I think
then?
it's fine if you've been mugged by black people multiple times. You don't have
You
that
really think that's
experience.
okay?
So you stop being around black people? You don't want to be around like black neighborhoods anymore because you think they're like dangerous? Are you okay with that? Because if you are, you're being
At least you're being consistent. Even though they're stupid, at least you're being consistent.
And
I
I
don't
think most white
white
people,
Lord
are gonna
most
God.
white people have an issue with racism. Yes.
have an issue with isn't necessarily this. There's a big
Most
difference
white
between
people are
not being
racist.
fully
That's what
familiar.
I'm saying.
You guys'
There's a big
pathfinding
difference
is
between being
terrible.
directly interpersonally racist and having like complicated sociological biases as a product of growing up in a racist society.
That is racism. Yes, having complicated racial biases because you grew up in a racial society is racism. Yes.
As
That's
is
a part of
wanting to
racism,
avoid
too.
white people because you think they're racist. Look, do you think it's okay for a white?
I just don't even. I can't believe
Yeah, because
that I'm like arguing about racism.
no, but the thing is, you aren't even distinguishing between these two things. The only thing you're saying is it's okay when black people do it because we're oppressed. That's been your answer to everything we've said.
Everything.
My distinguishment is that there's systemic racism. My distinguishment is that
but there's a
when
difference
black
between
people
systemic
don't want to be
racism and racism.
around.
I'm not talking about systemic
so
racism.
I'm saying that when black people, well, I'm talking about systemic racism, which is like the point of what we're talking about when we talk about racism. We're talking about
They're both
racism, we're not just talking about people being rude.
Well, you can,
Systemic racism, I would argue, is a lot more relevant than just people
I'm just talking
being
about
annoyed by people.
interpersonal racism of bias against people because they belong to groups. Look, here's a question, okay? What about a white gay person? Do you think it's okay for a white gay man to not want to be around black people?
Generally, yeah. Maybe if there was like
Why?
one example that I could think of, but it's probably racist. I don't really know the context, but probably.
Well, you don't think it's... Why would it be racist? Black people are more homophobic than white people by a pretty significant
I don't know
amount,
about
so
that, but
maybe they've had experiences.
Black community really has been
black guys,
like
and
quite
now,
homophobic.
Their bias.
I wouldn't say
is
more.
a product of a lifetime of oppression.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that context, like if you're a gay person and like you've been around black people and they're like been really homophobic, I think that's valid. Like I said, I can't think of. I'm sure there's exceptions
telling.
to being racist, and you just
And
thought
really
of one, in my opinion.
Says a lot about you as a person.
Okay, so I guess you think racism is okay as long as it's being justified in the context of
Someone who's been
oppression?
oppressed. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yes.
I
that
don't
is
think
your
that
argument.
Racism is okay if it's in the context of oppression. I think that people have these experiences of systemic oppression, and not wanting to have those experiences anymore is valid. Like in the example of a gay person not wanting to be around.
That's literally
like
your
black people
argument.
who are
It's okay to
homophobic.
be like that.
I think there is a rampant issue of homophobia among a lot of black people, and it's like this person
What?
just doesn't want to face systemic oppression anymore.
Okay.
And I think,
what about
like-
TERFs? trans exclusionary radical feminists, many of whom are victims of sexual violence from men, and as a product of oppression they've experienced, sexism they've experienced from men, they think that trans women are infiltrators trying to break up their spaces and make them more vulnerable to assault in the future. Do you think that it's okay for TERFs to be transphobic?
Why should it be okay with TERFs, bro?
No, I think that's like mischaracterizing trans people. I don't think most trans people are.
Wow.
I don't think most black
Very
people are
inconsistent.
Most white people are racist, or most black people are criminals. That's never been a problem before.
I think there's like a lot of issues with homophobia with black people, but I guess there are a lot of black people who aren't. So
and there are a lot of.
I think the point is like.
And then there are a lot of male-bodied people who attack
There's a gay
women.
person who like doesn't want to experience homophobia, and is like, I've experienced homophobia a lot, and they want to avoid that situation. I think it's really different than like a person who doesn't want to interact with people because like they think that like all black people are thugs based on a stereotype.
What about the wait? It's not a stereotype that people who are assigned male at birth are way more likely to engage in sexual violence against women. That's not a stereotype at all. That's a mathematical fact.
No, I'm saying about the stereotype of black people being thugs. Like,
no, I know.
There's all these stereotypes that people have about black people, not from knowing them.
No,
and
right,
I think if someone wants to like avoid a situation where like they could be homophobic,
I don't know about that. Like
experience homophobia, like I can understand that.
So,
Rape
but
thing.
our TERFs justify
Creeper
that because
go.
their bigotry is a product of a lifetime of sociological oppression against them from, for the most part, male-bodied people. So they take that and they internalize that and they beam that back out at everyone who's male-bodied.
Are you saying that? Are you saying that? But like, is the demographic of people that they're experiencing violence from trans people?
Well, in the past, you haven't cared about how likely it is that you experience any of the stereotypes that you're assigning. You've just said that it's okay as long as the bias is a product of sociological oppression, which TERFs, because most of them are women, have experienced. So I'm testing your consistency here because TERFs are an example of an oppressed group of people, assuming they're women, who use their experience of oppression to attack another marginalized group.
I think it's wrong. Like, for example, like if I think an example of like a gay person, if like a gay person just started saying like all black people are homophobic, I think that would be a very racist statement. But I think if you're saying like I've had the experience of being in black spaces where black people are homophobic and I don't want to be around that, I think that's a different story. I don't think it's like fair for TERFs to paint trans people as people who are attackers when that's just not what trans people are. So
well, I'm sure some
I think
trans
like the point
people
that I'm
are
talking
attacked.
about is systemic racism, where it's like there
Probably,
are structures in
but
place
we
that
shouldn't.
have
I don't know.
empowered people to oppress people. Like there are systemic structures that make it really hard for people to be trans without just getting oppressed. There's systemic structures that just make it hard to be black, and that's like built into our system.
And hard to be a woman.
That's like the point of what we're talking. And hard to be a woman. There's like all these things.
Can I ask you then?
Racism. Let me just finish this thought. Is that okay? So it's like there's all of these structures that make it really hard to exist as a person.
There is.
And so my point is that like the homophobia or racism, like the point that we're talking about is, or the oppression that we're talking about are people having to deal with systemic oppression. It's like if it's not coming from like these systems of structures that have like gone on for hundreds of years, then people just being rude or is still unpleasant, but it's not the same thing as having to deal with these.
Oh, you really did just do your one last laugh, did you?
It's still bad to be bigoted, even if you're not reinforcing systemic oppression.
It is.
Well, I think my point is that like bigotry, the main issue with it is that it's enforcing systemic oppression. And I think there's bigotries that don't do that are still looked down on. But I generally, when I think people being bigoted, I think of them being sexist or homophobic or racist or Like those people are enforcing like, these systems of oppression. And like that's what's so egregious about it, is that we're fighting the system constantly.
I think this fits, I don't know the profile perfectly, because it doesn't seem like you care very much about like people in power. The concept, like, to you, it's dualistic. There's the oppressor and the oppressed, and action against the oppressor is implicitly more justified, just like contextualized than it
Not
was.
just the
Whereas any
oppressor,
action done the other way
the people
around
that
is
look like the oppressor.
essentialized, direct, and for which all members of that group are morally culpable. This, to me, is basically the conservative stereotype of leftism. Is it really that wrong to
Yes,
say
it
it's
is.
wrong for black people to be racist against white people, or like not all white people in South Africa are colonized, or whatever else? It just seems like you jump through so many hoops, so you never let go of that one point you want to hold on to, which is the inherent moral inferiority of the oppressor, or to be more accurate, members of the oppressor group. But in reality, I am no more morally culpable for any of these systems than any other person who lives in my country, oppressed or oppressor. We're born into them. That's how systems work. I'm not the president. I don't think you are. We don't control them directly. We're affected by them. And types of analysis like what you're engaging in are like second wave feminists here. Modern intersectional analysis is the reason why, for example, we're capable of recognizing that feminism is for men too, because men suffer from a lot of patriarchal stereotypes, or how white people can actually be harmed by the legacy of colonialism, because in a way, racism was used as an apparatus to justify the economics of bourgeoisie control. If you look at it a little bit past like oppressor oppressed, you realize that there are underlying systems that have so little
Please
to
tell
do
me there isn't a
with,
skeleton
like, the
spawner.
interpersonal. And that's why, given all of that, I just feel like we have to take a step back, like take a deep breath and go like, yeah, some black people basically are just doing racism but from the other side. Not most of them, very few, but it happens. Yeah, there are women who just hate men. They're a minority, but they exist. Yeah, this, yeah, that. And we can just take a deep breath, and once we get that acknowledgement out of the way, we can
That's
work
hilarious.
on
He
a real
hit the
meaningful
creeper.
project
Creeper
fixing all the
kills.
problems that we're so
Oh my god.
So you're saying that if we can like admit that there are women who hate men, just like in general, that we can like finally work on the real issue.
On the left, I unironically think a lot of people need to acknowledge that fact, because pretending that doesn't exist is what kept the left from recognizing the threats of TERFs for so long. TERFs have been around for a while, but the online left didn't even acknowledge their existence for ages, because all of the obvious behavioral patterns of their oppression, like constantly judging male-bodied people, were so evident to real activists, but so invisible to people who were afraid of criticizing women.
Yep.
So you're saying that like we need to defend, or not defend, you're saying that we should have been critical of women who arbitrarily hate men because it just allowed TERFs to grow because we weren't critical of them.
Yeah, well also they hate men, which sucks because dudes rock, you know?
Yeah. Pee-pee.
So like basically if we had just criticized women who arbitrarily hate men, then TERFs wouldn't be a thing.
Probably.
I think that if we recognized a lot of man,
they probably wouldn't be as big as they are. That's probably his argument.
You know? But if you look under the hood, there's a lot of really problematic shit behind that. Not just with trans people, but a lot of toxic femininity too, you know? And I think a lot of that flourished in left spaces because we mistakenly allowed those people in as if they were feminists when they weren't. They were just anti-male.
Yep. Which is what pushed me off.
I don't really know.
Turned me off from the left for a long time.
Came about in order to like have an opinion on if like we needed to stop people who just like arbitrarily hated men from being able to talk. But I think
no, we just need to acknowledge that they exist and push back against their talking.
Whole thing a few years ago,
and their rhetoric.
Like sat on a chair, and then they like had like a gap or something. It was like guys like setting. I think it's called man spreading, and I kind of thought that was like kind of weird because it was like, well,
it was cringe.
You can still sit down in that seat. It's just crammed, and it kind of just sucks because it's public transportation. And I kind of thought that was like a little bit strange, but I'm trying.
It was cringe.
Yeah, I think I just don't know.
People kind was also pretty cringe too.
And about how TERFs came, like all of a sudden there were just like TERFs everywhere, and I was like, "Fuck this."
It was a really like performative and liberal denunciation of like male-bodied people, which is weird because any criticisms you make there are going to affect trans women. You know, dick and balls, leg spread, etc., etc. And B, it doesn't really change anything beyond enforcing a kind of broader satirical. It's like when people laugh about men suffering, you know. It's again, I don't think men
I
are
hate
worse
that.
than
It's
women.
no
I'm not
wonder
here to
the
bitch about
suicide
it. I
rate
just
for
think
men
that
is just so high.
holistically recognizing that stuff gives us a a path forward. And I think it about race stuff too. I'm not gonna sit here and
Can you tie that back in, because I'm not as familiar with the turf stuff, but if you could talk about like the race stuff.
I think that there are a lot of, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say a lot of. When I say a lot of, I mean like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. But I think there's at least an intellectual tradition among Black Americans to disregard a lot of valid intersectional analysis in favor of something that feels more retributive, you know? I don't think that's explicitly said to be that. I don't think this is like...
disregard a lot of analysis for... Can you say that part again?
Like intersectional analysis in favor of like retributive justice, you know? Adopting the same language about white people that a lot of second wave feminists took about men. Where, you know, like political lesbianism among second wave feminists, like Andrea Dworkin was one. It's not so much about saying yes to women as it is no to men.
Pretty much.
Something like that, you know? And a lot of it seems... Oh, look, I'm not going to pretend it's some threat to the union or whatever. Black people don't have the political power to do real harm in that way, and even if they did, it's such a tiny minority.
Yet.
Not even like a real problem. It's just
but
much
if we
like
did,
pinkies and lefty groups, I just think there's this nugget of bad info that lefties don't call out because they're worried about being problematic.
And it weakens the left.
Because optically, me talking about race with you for 2.5 hours probably doesn't look great for me either. But
yeah, it really didn't look good for you.
If it's conversations
I'm sorry, bro.
I am super in favor of conversations, you know?
Yeah, I'm kind of a little bit I'm just kind of like in a little bit of like a loss of like why it's wrong if Black people like joke about like white people being racist. I mean, like I think there's obviously exceptions, but I think like most of the time like the jokes about like white people come down to calling out some sort of structure of racism that white people are often really ignorant towards. And I just don't understand like how that all ties in.
I don't have a problem with that. It's more like, you know, the Mayo side joke.
No.
Like it's like Mayo, like white people, you know, like Mayo side now, like kill the whiteys, whatever. I think it was more popular a couple years ago than it is now. And I used to make those jokes all the time. Early on in my stream, I made them all the time. But I made them less and less because I'd see these Twitter threads where people would talk about Mayo side now, but at first when I saw them, they were obvious jokes. Like a white guy would wear like a button-up shirt, bell bottoms, and a vest to a dance floor at a bar and do disco. And it's like Mayo side now, and God willing, you know. But then later on, I saw people saying Mayo side now on tweets of interracial couples celebrating their mixed-race child.
Yeah,
and I thought,
that's
okay,
gross.
hold on, wait. That's not a joke. That's just something you believe. And I realized that what
oh, my gold apples burned in lava, of course.
Was actually like 90% a joke, and that a small minority was legitimately expressing anti-white racism through the veneer of edgy, irreverent comedy. And invariably, anti-white racism from Black people usually hits mixed race people the hardest because of
I can agree with that.
And I noticed that, and I got uncomfortable with it because it felt like I was giving cover to people the same way a lot of edgy jokes about women give cover to real misogyny. I say, still making edgy jokes about women. So stuff like that makes me worry a little bit, you know? I'm not saying like it's bad to ever make jokes. I don't know.
I think like the thing with like interracial couples is like there's an issue with Black people where like they don't want to date their own race because they think that, oh, so your eyes are really wide, can you hear me?
Oh no, I can. I'm sorry, I was reacting. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so there's an issue where a lot of Black people don't even want to date people in their own race because of like internalized racism. And so I think that's why like Black people are really harsh on other Black people when like they date interracially, because that's happening a lot of times, but it's not always what's happening.
Yeah, I get that. And I just want to be clear, by the way, there's an underlying logic to this that I get, because a lot of it also has to do with black people in certain communities lashing out against black people who talk like me. Notice this.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in LA, and LA is right next to
It's
East
a very
LA
real
and
thing.
Koreatown, and there are plenty of minority
I've dealt with
groups
jokes
there,
about
and
it,
there
but
are
I don't
black
mind people
who
joking about it,
race
but people
traitors
have said
and
that
other
stuff
black people
to me.
talking like me and not talking, I don't know, an AAV or whatever. And I think that's inherently shitty, because I think you talk how you're going to talk, you know. But I do understand the reflexive feeling of I don't know, like you're like this reflexive like worry of selling out, I guess.
I feel like some of them do it because they assume that when I talk like this, I'm better than them. I think I'm better than them, when it's really not the case.
I think the conversation's good. There's like an extreme to this where people will start saying it's actually okay to be mean to black people for talking like me, or it's okay to be anti-interracial marriage because it's part of the broader war against white supremacy, and that's when things get too far. And I just hope we can not do that, you know.
I mean, on that point, like, people have accused me of like being like a kind of like race traitor because of the way that I talk, but this is just how I talk, because again, I was adopted.
So you understand that.
White people. But at the same time, when people accuse me of that, even though it's like a frustrating experience, because I'm like, well, no, I'm not like a race traitor. It's also like I understand like why people will think that, because there's a lot of black people who code switch. There's a lot of black people who think because they talk the way that I do that they're superior. And so like for me, when people assume that, I still feel frustrated, but I'm also kind of like, well, fine. If you get to know me, you'll see that I'm not, and if you don't, I understand.
They'll see that you're trashed.
It would be really helpful if white leftists made for black people, where it was like understanding their anger, and instead of being like triggered by it, like going like, where is this anger coming from? What's happening here? And instead of taking it personally, like understand that like people are responding to racism constantly, and to give them space for that.
Well, I'm totally down for understanding it, but you have to criticize it too, you know? I understand the concerns of neo-Nazis. Because I've argued with so many of them.
Like,
I'm not
saying
critique,
like, okay, like,
just saying.
Maybe use some different examples other than neo-Nazis to like make a point. Might help sometimes.
I've argued with so many of them. The point that I'm making is that I think even the most like pernicious and horrible political beliefs can be understood. QAnon or whatever. I understand like the foundations that are being laid. I get that. I just disagree with them severely. Obviously, the response to these has to be very different. I don't think that your average fucking neo-Nazi should be addressed and treated in the same way that like a black person who has mixed feelings about their son playing Undertale or doing some other white shit. I don't know.
Some other white shit.
I don't think these are
like
exactly
playing Minecraft.
I'm just saying that the basis of understanding should be there, and then atop that you build the criticism, right?
I mean, I think for me, like the way that I approach it, and like obviously everyone's different, but for me, like, you know, let me give you like a little bit of background where I come from. Like, I come from a place where like I had a lot of internalized racism. Like, the family that adopted me really thought that like me growing up around white people was gonna make me better, as opposed to being around my black family.
Really?
So, like,
that's kind of messed up.
Like, you know, not liking black people, trying to distance myself. Like, I'm half Chinese, and so I would be like, oh, like I'm half Chinese, and like I was always talking about that to like distance myself from white people. And there was like a point where I realized like the reason why I wanted to distance myself from white people was because of growing up around racism.
So you weren't being an Uncle Tom
like,
to
I see black people and they're like really frustrated
basically.
about like when they're frustrated at me because they think I'm like code switching, like, or not code switching, like I think I'm superior. Like there was a time in my life where like I really did think that it was better that I talked this way. And I think that when black people are suspicious of me, I think they actually have every right to be suspicious of me.
God,
like,
you were so willing to give people the worst things, the benefit of the doubt. I'm cool giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's just like you're giving their behavior the benefit of the doubt. It's, I don't know.
I think they have every right to be suspicious, and if they end up getting to know me, realizing I'm not that person, then
and that you're worse, then they'll hate you for something completely different.
Like, the amount of racist shit that black people deal with on a regular basis is so intense, and I understand like why they come to these conclusions.
Man, you have way the fuck more patience. I don't give a if people assume bad shit about me, I'll be mean as shit to them. I don't give a fuck. You
I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying is like the issue though.
That
you
to
could
me,
just like try to understand for a little bit
instead
of getting really angry at them.
Well, that to me is, I'm trying to be disrespectful here, is your issue. You should be more proud of who you are. my opinion.
True.
I don't think your
I'm proud of who I am.
well, unapologetically so. You know, like a unstoppable tidal wave that smashes against everything in front of you. Because I think that there's this constant. I don't know. A lot of people feel really guilty about who and what they are in left spaces because we're so aware of the oppression that we receive and we inflict.
Why?
And I guess there are different ways to handle that. I understand where your feelings come from. There are ways to be.
I don't feel guilty though.
Well,
I feel angry.
Right, not guilty, but I mean with the understanding why people might distrust you, you know? Like, to me, sociologically, I understand why a lot of people in the online left are going to distrust me because of my affect and because, oh my god, there are so many clips of me out there. But I can't focus on those people because I have a job to do and you have a job to do. And I think
if your job is like trying to like be anti-racist, you know, anti-homophobic, anti-da-da-da, like, you know, specifically against the systems of oppression.
And then you say this, and then you talk about Vaush being racist and this and that.
Yes, but if you believe what
God, you are such a snake.
Sorry, not to apologize. To disagree, to adopt the positions you think are most valid. And in your case,
I think
you acknowledge this and you understand this, and then later you go back and then you call Vaush an unironic racist. Literally, you are an actual snake woman. Seriously, absolutely disgusting. I have no problem calling you a snake either, because that's exactly what you are.
By any means, I can talk about my own racist experiences, and that's it. Being black in America is the same as being black in Africa. I don't even have the experience of growing up in poverty, and it's like
you literally acknowledge the truth, and then you go back on it just to call Vaush a racist.
And I think that's like the point. It's like there's so much that we don't know, and my point is like in the form of debates, you're not actually gonna learn a lot about almost anything. Like what did we learn today? What did we learn about colonization?
I learned something.
Nothing.
I learned that you're an idiot.
With respect, well, I just want to say
for like 2 hours. Like we could have watched a video just talking about it, learned so much more.
It's true.
There's so much. My point is like there's so much that we don't know, and we
learn that there's something wrong.
What we probably should listen more than we talk. I think.
I could have gone to the movies. I could have gone to the beach. Look, debate is not a phenomenal means by which you arrive at the truth. Debates are fundamentally entertainment, and I've always recognized that. I tried to learn a lot off stream, because having
why?
Around the
Where did you come from, though?
I think is smart, or criticize me when I don't know it. It's not conducive, but. With regards to the productivity of this discourse, I think there was something at least meaningful to me, which I feel like I understand where you're coming from a little bit here. I do think you assign much more charitability to the oppressed over the oppressor when it comes to the degree of intrinsic association with sociological problems. And it seems
evil is evil, no matter what the reason for it is.
Pardon me, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's something that seems to be the case.
I'll put it like this.
You compensating for
if somebody rapes your sister
experiences in your life where you
and you retaliate by raping their sister, you're equally as bad.
It's not like I don't do
you can't counter evil with more evil. It's disgusting.
It's like I learned about how messed up things were, and then I kept learning, and then I kept learning, and then I kept learning, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't really know anything. So maybe I should just like listen
for
like a long time. And I think
you still don't know anything.
Because of racism, people don't want to listen to black people. Like I think like even in this conversation, like seeing the way that black people are being silenced, like this is why I'm so frustrated about the thing that happened with like No Name, because No Name was like saying like my tweets are not for white people, and then you called her a segregationist.
Sure,
it's like seeing like a lot of
she'll be fine. It's Twitter, bro. Twitter's not a real place. Shut up.
People are trying to get revenge. Like black people just want equality, and black people can even talk about their frustrations without.
Black people.
Did I forget some? Oh man.
Different black people want lots of different things. And by the way,
I think most black people want equality. And what I'm saying is like when black people talk about their frustrations, black people see that they need their own space. They get shit on. And I think your rhetoric is just a continuation of that. And that's why I'm so upset.
But there are also a lot of white people who want equality, who don't know how to best achieve it, and in doing so they promote a kind of liberal colorblindness, where they think the best way to achieve equality is by not even talking about race. The desire to achieve equality is not the same as having a good action plan to get there, and black people, same as any other group of people, don't get born with political science degrees, so it's not surprising to me that I'm going to find disagreements with people of any racial group
It is
on
what it
subjects
is.
like this. And I will never look at it. I'll never look at a take. I'll never look at a political perspective that I disagree with and hold off on criticizing it because of the race of the person making it. That
Because I would be
like
racist.
incredibly patronizing. You know what I mean? So like I'm some white aficionado sipping champagne and leaving it to the common. It's to me it's very very weird. I think that
It's a little condescending in my opinion.
Ideas, no matter who they come from, and I will not back off my point that a lot of the rhetoric that I think you have used and that No Name used is problematic to me. But I don't think that me thinking it's problematic is part of some rejection of racial equality. You know, like because I advocate for that all the time through fairly revolutionary means too. I just think that sometimes there are elements of this that are pernicious and should be corrected, and I don't think the race of the people doing the criticizing and receiving the criticism changes that equation. You know?
All right, I think what you're saying right now sounds very reasonable, and I think in practice, like the way that these terms get thrown around, the way that like, you know, like say Andrew's like just accused of starting a race war, like these are like really heavy accusations, and it's like people just saying stuff like people like pointing out the racial issues on the left, people pointing out the racial divide. It's like if those issues can't be engaged with without literally jumping to these extremes, then it's going to make it really hard for those people to talk about this.
And then
it's
you
like,
go and berate Vaush in the video
to, like,
for being
racist.
racist.
Like, I know you really
after saying this, I will not back away from this. It's such a snakish behavior.
Like in this
a snakish thing to do.
Again, like I was compared to Hitler. It's just like that's kind of an extreme.
Well, I mean, when we're talking about, you know, the right to self-determination and, you know, the union of the people to excise the... Yeah, I think it's... One of the reasons why I make these comparisons is because I don't think a lot of people realize how close everything we do and talk about is to fascism. A lot of people think fascism is this super far-off political ideology that's a mile away from American liberal democracy, and it's so far away, and it's, oh God, you know, it's not even comparable to anything. But in reality, everything that we do and every exercise of state power is bubbling a millimeter above everything that we despised from Nazi Germany, from Mussolini's Italy, from all of them.
They justify it. They
so goddamn close.
They found a way to justify it
because people underestimate the way in which
slowly but surely they made their horrible actions justifiable to them.
Of the worst governments to have ever existed. So I use these terms because I think it's important to know how close we are to that precipice. That all it takes.
Can you?
All it takes is a little.
That all it takes, and this is a fact, by the way. All it takes
just like,
is a charismatic South African leader. It could happen 5, 10, or 20 years from now, or maybe it won't. I hope it doesn't, you know, who talks about colonization and the dispossession of the people and the fact that, you know, South Africa is for Africans. And you run that rhetoric down like 5 inches and you get camps. I don't think that's hyperbolic. I just think that's the logical extension of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here.
I don't think it's hyperbolic. I mean, like Idi Amin was like a horrible dictator. I think what I'm talking about is like realistically, like when I've seen, you know, I've only read a bit about countries that have colonized themselves, but like when I read about it, it's like, what are they going to do? It's like when you look at like each case study, it looks really different. And at the end of the day, like the people who've gotten rid of their colonizers, it's good. And I guess that's really my point. I mean, in this conversation, I think I've like kind of like in this conversation, like I've like, you know, said like, okay, like there's boundaries that I want to make here. Like, okay, no genocide. That's good. But then there's like all these
finally saying that
where people have like civil wars, and I'm glad that they got rid of the colonizers. And to the extent where they did that, they're fine. They're not separatist places, but they got rid of a lot of the colonialist population. And it's like, well, what do you want? What do you want people to do?
Right? You know, you can attack colonizers without attacking a race of people. There are people, white people, who have lived in South Africa for hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't think they're any more colonizers than the black people they're neighbors to.
But the people who left were white, and I guess like I'm not really sure. Like I guess whatever you want to call it, it's like the people who have colonized them, which
the people who
are
left
going
were
to
Dutch,
be.
But now they're South African, born there, citizens.
Don't know about the subject to
anyone else who lives there. regardless.
comment on it.
If you want to decolonize stuff, I mean, I'm in favor of decolonization.
Colonialist structures.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like, how do you end the colonialism? Like, what would you do?
But you have to. You have to do it without attacking.
What would you do? Has to be left up to those people, and the reason why I keep on saying that is because it's like, I'm not South African and I'm not Kenyan, I'm not a Tanzanian. It's like those people have to figure out what they're gonna do about their colonial situation, and that's kind of where it's like I can have thoughts on that. We can
still morally disallow some things. For example,
I'll say that.
Yeah.
It's about time he's saying that. Jesus.
Consider homosexuality to be a component of Western propaganda, that our degeneracy spread around the world, so they kill their gay people. That's not good, and they might say that killing gay people is part of them decolonizing because they're removing the culture of their colonizers. Now, I don't care how they think that works. I am not defending that, and I will impugn them for it. And I think the same can go for a lot of other strategies of decolonization, because I don't think excising a racial group is really ever going to be the most effective way of decolonizing. And if it is, honestly, then maybe colonization has to simmer for a bit longer. I mean, if you're doing the utilitarian math on this, it's like, we could end colonization, we only have to kill 10 million people. It's like, oh, well, I don't know.
It doesn't just look like
tough math,
just killing people like that. It comes up in being like a civil war.
Sure. But when the civil war happens, who's getting attacked, right? Say a civil war happens in South Africa. There are two civil
I'd rather
wars.
not
I'm okay with
get a good stomp, bro.
The civil war that I agree with is power structures that have been historically white coalesce to seize power from the government, and South Africans beat them back, and decolonization takes place when the leaders who did their own business die or are excised from the country, and the coup fails. And then there's the other kind of civil war, where racial tension between white and black people escalate as acts of stochastic terrorism are inflamed on both sides, until eventually the vast majority of the population, the black South Africans, overwhelm the white South Africans, and you see essentially the night of broken glass all over again. And you see just families being torn from homes, killed in the street, lit up in pyres, stuck from trees, which is what happens when people think it's okay, morally necessary even, to slaughter entire ethnic groups for some perceived moral crime. That civil war is not one that I will defend. The first one is totally okay.
I'm just saying, like, that just like doesn't happen.
It does happen.
You sure about that?
Like, I guess what I'm thinking, saying it doesn't happen. Like, I don't know of a South African country or of an African country that does that. It's like when I hear about people who have decolonized themselves, it's to the extent of like taking away the colonial power. But I do think like if there's I guess like example Idi Amin, for example, like that's a really extreme example. He was called the Butcher of Uganda, and it's like that he was a dictator, and like he needs to stop.
Also the Rwandan genocide, quite a few people died there too. But we don't have to say it's happened before.
That's not like a reflection though of the people. I think like what are the people as a whole saying they need? Of course, there's gonna be people who disagree, but there's like these like, especially when I read about like colonialism, like there's like these mass movements of people trying to find their own independence.
But
and
no,
looks like.
But that is.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm just saying, like when I like the examples that I've read about, I don't know like every single example, but the examples I've read about, like that looks like getting rid of the colonists to the point of ending that colonial power.
But this did happen in Rwanda, though. That was an attempt at dispelling like elements of colonial power. Yeah, I'm also being linked from chat. The expulsion of Asian people from Uganda, who were a component of the mostly people of Indian descent, who were a component of the colonization of that country as well.
And was that under Idi Amin?
Well, and we don't have to. I don't know the specifics.
It's like that person was a dictator, and like I'm talking about like an entire nation trying to figure out having their own autonomy.
Yeah, but now you're layering together preconditions that you can't control. It's all well and good to say, the will of the people, but in reality, how often do things actually play out that way? Strong men take power, and they're the ones who get it done. Even in democracies, we don't have will of the people. America has a more functional democracy than almost anything you'd see in Africa. Nothing that happens out of Congress is the will of the people, and even if it took place through a democracy, we're still fundamentally talking about genocidal violence. And even if this hasn't happened to the extent as what I described before, which it has, Like, why do we have to wait for it to happen for us to condemn its potential, you know? Like,
I mean, the examples of like people.
we've never had a genocide of 7 million Jews. That's never happened. But I can still say, yeah, if 7 million Jews were killed, that would be pretty bad too, you know? Like, I don't need to wait for that to happen to warn against it.
Really?
Like, the examples of, I'm thinking of people who have decolonized people, it very much was a movement of the people. Like in Kenya, Tanzania, Algeria.
Do you not think populist revolutions can do horrible things?
I totally think they do, yeah.
What about, like,
So
Pol
why...
Pot? That was a component of decolonization. What about the Cultural Revolution? I mean, Pol Pot killed people who wore glasses because it was, like, meant that they had been corrupted by Western intelligentsia. That was
right.
explicitly...
And I'm not endorsing that. Like, I'm saying that, like, dictatorship is wrong. That's why I'm saying, like, very much that needs to be a movement of the people. And, like, the examples I'm thinking of, they are movements of the people. And I think that's good, that those people had those autonomy to, and the self-determination to get rid of colonialism.
But
I think that's amazing.
Were the Khmer Rouge not the people? Was the Cultural Revolution not the people? And also, can't the people do bad things? The people do bad things all the time, I mean.
Sure, yeah. I think there's definitely bad things that you can do in trying to get rid of colonialism. And I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm not saying that, like, you can just do whatever you want when you're decolonizing things. But I think my point is that, like, when you're looking at these examples of people, like, you're looking at, like, a really messy history of, like, trying to get rid of colonialism. It's like there's a lot of like really good and bad things that have happened. At that point, it's the issue is like dealing with a problem that you shouldn't have ever had to deal with because those people shouldn't have been colonized in the first place. That doesn't mean that you can't, like, critique what they've done. Doesn't mean that you can't say that certain things are wrong.
The Rwanda genocide was also not done by a dictator. It was done by rebel fronts. It was done by what was essentially like a populist mass, you know. I'm all good, well in favor of democracy and all that, but we have to protect minorities in democratic structures, right? If we didn't believe in that,
I'll
then
say that, yeah.
Yeah, if we didn't believe in that, then, you know, you and other black people would probably be in a much worse position here.
God, I just don't understand how they're having, like, some semblance of a decent conversation at this moment, and then she goes on to call Vaush racist.
So if you defer everything to the will of the population, you still leave room for, you know, like, horrible stuff to be done. And that's the only thing I'm saying. I'm just saying we shouldn't do ethno-states and we shouldn't do genocides. That's my, you know...
Because she didn't want to be wrong.
Okay, well,
God, bruh, I hate it when people do this. Playing the race. This is exactly the kind of thing that gives these right-wingers their narratives.
Like, necessarily, like, hurting...
Playing the race card to hurt a white man. That's literally what she did. Oh my God.
Certain spaces for black people to be away from oppressed people.
Like police? Would you enforce it with state power, or do you just...
This is absolutely annoying.
Pretty sure those exist.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it would be like anarchist or something like that. I don't know. Because, like, anarchists probably wouldn't have police. Like, I don't know. It's all very not realistic because it's, like, not something that's gonna happen. I think my point is that I can understand why people are like, I don't want to live with people who have oppressed me anymore, and I think people need to be able to talk about that.
All I'm saying is that you can talk about that. I feel like I understand the feelings. It's just I can't get around the fact that they're identical to white nationalist arguments that I've heard. Because this is how it goes too, right? You talk about the abstracts of white nationalism, and they're like, well, yeah, I probably can't seize control of the U.S., so I'll just move over to, what's a really white state?
Black state?
I don't know. I'm going to move over to some all-white commune, and we're going to buy all the properties so there's no room for a black person to move in next door. And I just want to be rid of all the black crime or whatever. And hey, you know, oppression, interpersonal oppression from white people to black people can suck, but crime can also suck. So we're all sort of acting out our harms, our traumas here. I just don't think that justifies, like, the formation of, you know what I mean? It's just... you can just go so many bad roads with that. TERFs do the same thing, right? TERFs want
They most certainly do.
which they mean cisgender women's only spaces, because they've had a lifetime of hurt and violence and terror inflicted on them by people who have my body type. And for some reason, they think trans women have my body type, which they definitely don't. But it's one of the ways in which you can take hurt or harm and reflect it and essentially act the role of the oppressor in some tiny little pocket space you've created for yourself, you know?
Sure, I think in those instances, that's exactly that. And I think there's, like, I can really understand why Black people are tired of being around white people to the point where they would just, like, live in a place where there's not any white people because they experience so much racism. And I think that's my point.
All right, well,
I think, like, where they're coming from in the context really matters.
Don't make any, look, it has been over 3 hours, which is a pretty impressive run of time in any context. Whenever you make your ethno-city, whatever in America, just don't make any subtitles.
I like, literally don't want to. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just making a point about, like, being able to listen to people who are colonized, people who are oppressed, like, give them space to talk about their pain instead of just, you know, comparing them to Hitler. That's actually, like, the point.
Give them space to talk about their pain.
Agree with separatists. Ow. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying, like, try to understand their pain instead of just comparing them to Hitler.
I think he is. Well, and the fact that you're saying that implies that he isn't is just really disgusting and condescending.
I understand it well enough to understand the parallels, at least.
I mean, like, you can do both, but I think you're not really understanding where they're coming from if that's your takeaway.
Well, I think the problem is that where you're coming from is a reflection not of socioeconomic context, but of your mind state. And it may hurt to hear, but perceived oppression and real oppression have the same effect on a person's mind state.
It does.
A person who believes they're being subjugated by white people because they're Black is correct. A person who believes they're being subjugated by Jews because they're white is incorrect. But the correctness of the external belief bears no effect whatsoever on the internal world of the person who then constructs this political system. So in terms of knowing where you're coming from, that's why I call you similar to white nationalists. If I was talking about historical context, then there's no parallel whatsoever. It is in the mind state in which there is so much, so much.
No, they're not going to be able to get up here.
Whether the harm is real or imagined, the language that comes after is the same. We are being victimized, and we have a right to determine our own national autonomy and have a space free from this and from that, and then it all goes bad. Of course,
well, one group is actually being victimized.
Yes.
And then one group is not. So it's like.
But that doesn't have anything.
That doesn't have anything to do with their how they go about it.
Is a really important part of where they're coming from.
But where you're coming from is a reflection of your mind state.
It's irrelevant
is the same. Is there
when
any difference
the results of that are literally the same reactions.
Your friend Stacy should talk to you behind your back? No. In your mind, it's exactly the same. What you believe to be true is what you form your thoughts from, after all. How right you are has nothing to do with thoughts that you develop from them. So,
correct.
It's not about being right. It's about, like, one is, like, trying to solve an issue of, like,
that doesn't matter when the results will both be ethnic cleansing.
It's just, like, these racist beliefs that are used to justify the oppression of non-white people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not justifying the oppression of non-white people. I think that we can attack those without adopting the language of the oppressor.
But they're not adopting the language of the oppressor, actually. Like, these
how
are,
do you
like,
know?
Black people are trying to figure out how to be free.
Which is also what they say, right to self-determination, we should have a homeland.
Like, I think it's probably a lot more likely that
freedom, their idea of freedom can mean remove all whiteys. That's it.
Than the other way.
It can mean that to them.
Pretty much everything else.
I can't prove it, but, like, when I was looking this stuff up, like, there's Black nationalism, and that was, like, Black people talking about, like, how to find their own self-determination,
Oh, if that's the
And
case,
then,
I'm blaming you. Wait, hold on. If you get to blame white South Africans because hundreds of years ago their great whatever grandfathers colonized, don't make me blame all black people for the invention of like the logic of ethnostates. Okay, don't make. I'll essentialize back that far. Don't you take that further.
At some point, white supremacists adopted the term white nationalism, and that was like after there was black nationalism. And I can't prove it, but I wonder if they did that because people were so, you know, were like understanding of black nationalism that they wanted to adopt something that sounded a little bit more palatable. So it's like, yeah, I don't know if that really matters here, but
I mean, I couldn't really say. I don't know the etymology of the term. I can only say I think it's pretty bad. You know? I think that ethnostates are pretty bad altogether.
Yeah, ethnostates are gross.
I think they're generally probably a bad idea, but I understand.
Sure, spending a lot of time defending it.
Be around people who oppress them.
Well, like I said,
why is so unwilling to crit?
Don't make any sundown towns, okay? If any white Instagrammers van on through and stay at the hotel in the all-black ethno city, then just make sure they make it out okay. And I guess the worst elements of the insular white communities will be avoided. All that aside, you know, unironically, I do appreciate you coming on. We have the your demonstration.
You won't appreciate it later, Vaush.
Being on here for this long. I do appreciate it, and I did enjoy the conversation. And I do wish I'd gotten more brownie points. You sort of set that up, and I do wish I had.
Well, at least you got that one for platforming a content creator a 30th of your size.
Yeah. Well, there's always next time. I hope you have a wonderful.
There won't be a next time.
All right, goodbye.
Take care. You all can complain as much as you want. I think I held it together. I think I held it together.
For the most part, yeah.
Look, it's all about the people you compare yourself to is the you of yesteryear, and I have to say I feel like that conversation, if I had had it 2 years ago, would have been my end. It would have been the end of my life. You know, I would have had an aneurysm or something. The thing that's so frustrating to me is like, oh God, look, I have no idea why she feels the way that she feels or why she does the things that she does, but I feel like there's like a mental block. I feel like we need to psychoanalyze.
It's a lot of. I feel like it's a lot of hurt and pain that she suffered in her life. Considering all she said about her adoption and everything, and her separating herself from black people for the most part, I think she feels kind of bad about that, and she's trying to rectify that with her extreme rhetoric.
Changes the way she thinks about this stuff, and I don't know. Yeah, well, yeah.
Listen, Magma Slime.
I don't think she understands how so much of the stuff that she says really is like identical. I know people often get mad at me when I make the comparison.
Yeah.
With the language. You call everything Nazi.
Saying that is just, I don't think it's necessary, to be honest, because that'll trigger a lot of negative emotions.
I mean, like direct, like in justification.
Comparing a black person to a Nazi is like, yeah.
To some extent, like,
I don't think you really compared
all that stuff
to being a Nazi. It's just
mirrored very clearly. I actually wouldn't mind.
You're just trying to say that the logic behind the conclusions they come to is identical. But even then, that's just off-putting to a black person because you're basically comparing her to something that's
and I really felt, oh man, I feel like
that hates her.
That was like the ace in the hole when I talked about how where you're coming from is ultimately a product of what you think is true, not what actually is true. Understanding intentions has nothing to do with reality and everything to do with what you think reality is. I feel like I laid that out so well. And when I talked about what the ethno-states, like, they'd be worthless.
You did. She's just not willing to listen.
Microaggressions, I guess.
What? Oh my God, my friend.
A lot of points that I got there. I feel like I had some. Can I say I had some flippable moments, but in a good way? You know, like a.
Nope.
Good flippable moments.
God, people clipped you hard.
Highlights? Yeah, that's the term.
Well, actually, when they clipped you, they kind of made you look good. They tried hard to make you look bad.
Admit that bias was affecting her perspective. She said that she was adopted by
and unfortunately, people believed it.
I've got a bad memory, and also my head is a fog. and that like she feels like she understands why black people might distrust her because her affect growing up was influenced by white parentage. And I thought she was going to lead that into, and maybe that's why I overcompensate with regards to the feeling that I have to reflect back like elements of pernicious behavior black people experience or something like that. But
Because I feel like that's exactly what it is.
she said white dad. Oh, okay, yeah, I've got a bad memory. More concerned with the relationship between oppressor and oppressed than with the oppression itself. I don't think that she's like poorly intentioned or anything. It's true that decolonialism is always going to be a really messy business, and realistically, historically, usually a bloody business. But I think that like, man, just going full on like, yeah, white South Africans are all colonizers. Like the people in South Africa want to remove them, and that's their right to do so or something. It's like, damn, taking it all the way to like the full on goddamn the black crime argument started to flat after a while because it didn't really break through the logic of whoever's the power is the one to change things. Yeah, it's just I don't think she understood how the essentialization in and of itself is like a really big problem. Thank you. Yes, we can use this to calm down. Hello, Puppet. I don't think she understood because like whenever you essentialize sociological problems to a group of people, I mean, think it's like nothing good can come from that. You know, it's always something bad. It's just never.
Always.
What good analysis has ever come out of theory which began with this racial group does this problem? You know, it's just not the best. I don't think. Pigeon agrees with me. I think.
Man, God, I forgot how frustrating that was to listen to. Jesus. She kept circling back the same points, and I caught myself repeating all the same thing, all the same retaliations against her rhetoric. God, Lord. Now I can understand why that went on for 3 hours. Jesus, she talks in circles so much. I don't know, man. I do strongly feel like it is some kind of overcompensating for her family history and her distancing herself from black people in her kind of basically being an Uncle Tom for a little bit. That's kind of the impression I got from her when she was telling that story. And her answer to that is to just be wildly extremist. Yeah, so my opinion on her still stands. I think she's trash. It's incredibly sad that it's come to that. Her rhetoric does nothing to hurt, like the constant fight, battle, and struggle against the systemic racism that is still going on. And her language, like, will continue to breed fear, like white fear of the black takeover. And it just keeps the cycle of race hatred turning. White people do things to black people retaliate in awful extreme ways. White people will retaliate to those extreme awful things in even more extreme ways, and then black people retaliate back, and then white people retaliate back, and then it never ends. it'll never end. What? Oh Lord, okay. Wow! Is there another? There's another spawner. There has to be. Okay. All right. I'ma just. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, opinion of flowers reaffirmed. Flowers still bad. Probably make a video like reacting to Bad Bunny's awful take. Good lord, I think she's worse than Professor Flowers. All right, that's it. Nope, we're done. That's it. I'll stop. It's gone on for too long already.